1,000 years ago there was a war against demons. One day during the war, monsters suddenly crossed the border and attacked humanity. People had no choice but to enter this war in the hope of saving their lives. There was no end to the war. This terrible bloodbath had lasted too long. The whole earth was covered in blood. Under the onslaught of the monsters, the surviving people gradually retreated, having no strength to resist. But unexpectedly for all the people, a certain magician appeared riding on a dragon. He arrived on the battlefield riding a black dragon and began to destroy the monsters. He was an incredibly brave warrior who was willing to risk his life for the sake of all mankind. His dragon incinerated everything in its path. Monsters could not resist its flames. Frightened by such a sudden force, the monsters became frightened and ran away. People praised their hero, sincerely rejoicing at his appearance. But people's happiness did not last as long as they would have liked. When the war was won, the hero died an unexpected death. The people were waiting for the one who was chosen and were in mourning for the loss of him. But at the same time they continued to wait for the one who was carried away by power and did not succumb to temptations. The subway was not so crowded, but the same sounds came from most phones. People were captivated by the main event of the day. The 17th battle for the title of world champion was taking place. The battle was about to begin. The stands around the ring were packed. Fans were shouting motivational slogans for their idols. Patrick occupied the blue corner of the ring. The heavily muscled man walked to his place and greeted the crowd, raising his right hand. But most of the viewers were not happy with his candidacy. Immediately corresponding cries of his worthlessness and even wishes for his death were heard. A candidate with 37 of 37 won matches behind him walked into the red corner. He was a world champion with a 100% knockout rate, and his name was Jinho. His appearance in the ring immediately ripped off the voice of the entire audience, who were crazy about him. It was interesting how such a match would go. Patrick said that in the last fight Jinho did not use his legs, so it was assumed that he had some kind of injury. The host noted that Patrick could very well take advantage of this. The host noted that Jinho was already over 40, and if his leg injury was true, then a new champion could probably be born before the eyes of the public. The referee entered the ring to start the fight and called on the opponents to get ready. Patrick kept his eyes on his opponent, which was a staple in matches like this, but Jinho was incredibly scary to him. Patrick understood that such energy was to be expected from a champion like Jinho. But Patrick also knew that he needed to grab his opponent's leg to gain an advantage. The host commented that Patrick unexpectedly attacked first when he rushed at his opponent immediately after the match began. Patrick was angry, not understanding how Jinho dared to enter the ring against him with a sore leg, and considered him a real impudent man. He wanted to make sure that Jinho would never be able to use his leg again and tried to grab it in every possible way. At some point he was already glad that he managed to catch the leg, but he immediately received a strong blow to the face. Jinho struck back at Patrick with lightning speed, knocking him down. The referee immediately jumped between them, preventing Jinho from continuing his attack. Patrick lay there with his eyes rolled back and was unable to get up. The announcer confirmed that the first round ended with a knockout of Patrick. Jinho looked at the unconscious Patrick and asked if he understood why he didn't use his legs. After the fight, Jinho immediately went to the locker room. He changed into regular clothes and wanted to leave as quickly as possible. He slammed the door as if he was very annoyed. Hearing these sounds, the coach immediately hurried after him and demanded to know where he was going without even giving an interview to reporters. Jinho, without even turning around, sharply replied that the coach should answer their questions himself. The man was taken aback by the fighter's behavior despite how many fans he had. Jinho put his hood on his head, wishing the coach a good job, and asked him to contact him as soon as the next match appeared. The coach was confused and upset, but there was nothing he could do about it. He simply asked Jinho to drive home because the weather was terrible. But when Jinho assured him that everything was fine and said that it would be better to go for a run, since there were traffic jams on the roads, the coach saved his eyes from shock. For a moment the coach watched in confusion as the doors closed in front of him and Jinho disappeared behind them. Unable to bear it, he opened the door and shouted, reminding the boy that his house was 30 kilometers away. A crowd of reporters gathered outside the door, and they immediately began to squeal with joy at seeing this man. They immediately began to bombard the coach with countless questions about the past match, and about Jinho himself, who had managed to quietly slip past them. The coach understood that he would not be able to simply close the doors to the journalists and would have to answer their most pressing questions. Meanwhile, Jinho was actually running down the street in the rain just as he had told the coach. The coach understood him to some extent. This guy didn't like stupid and intrusive questions that were repeated every subsequent match. The coach was present at each of his fights and knew better than anyone what he was capable of. He often replayed in his mind all the matches Jinho had won. Jinho started his career with a knockdown, although he was in the lightweight category and not everyone could show such success. The coach even felt sorry for his protege. He felt sorry for him until the very end of his career. The coach was sure that there was no opponent he would be interested in fighting and not winning with a couple of blows. Jinho ran all 30 kilometers, stopping occasionally. He was not fazed by the heavy rain that hit the city, and despite this he successfully reached home. As he rode up to his floor in the elevator, he was very thoughtful and even a little upset. Soon the elevator panel showed him on the 34th floor. When Jinho approached the door of his apartment, he found that there were many bags and boxes with gifts standing near it. Seeing this, he only became more angry because he had previously asked not to leave anything at his door. Having expressed his indignation out loud, he fell silent again and went into the apartment, leaving the gifts outside. Entering the apartment, he glanced around. It was a 2-story apartment with a spacious living room, panoramic windows, and very good repairs. Immediately after arriving home, he took a shower and came out of the bathroom, drying his head with a towel. Afterwards, he often threw the towel on the floor and, sighing heavily, walked on. All this time he was waiting for the moment when he could sit at his computer again. He immediately sat down in the chair and turned on the computer. A smile immediately appeared on his face, and it seemed that the depressed mood disappeared. He launched a console game called The Last Savior, which he was crazy about. It was so difficult that even Koreans stopped playing it. But for the past 10 years Jinho has played it every day. Due to the fact that his life was full of training-ordered battles with the strongest opponents, he had long since burned out from this. He sat with great pleasure and, waiting for the game to start, happily wondered if he would be lucky enough to complete a task there again. Only in this game he could feel what he couldn't in real life. He had a huge competitive spirit. In the game he fought against the Demon King Azar, whom he actually could not defeat. But even each subsequent defeat did not upset him, but on the contrary gave him more positive emotions and motivation. Bad weather or some minor troubles in real life did not upset him in any way. He was very passionate about this game and its strongest opponent. After some time he managed to reduce the amount of health of this demon to almost the minimum, and it seemed that he was about to finally defeat him. But after the enemies attacked Jinho's face changed. He started losing again, and this both upset and angered him. With the enemy having so little health left, it seemed very stupid to lose and to waste so much time on it. Jinho didn't want to lose again and tried to gather his thoughts and stay in the game as long as possible. He tried to replenish all the powers of his game character as much as possible, hoping for a long-awaited victory. The enemy launched serious and powerful attacks that were very difficult to dodge. Jinho began to loudly curse at the current situation. But he did not give up and did everything possible to crush the Demon King Azar. But even his 10 years of experience seemed paltry in a battle with such a boss. But surprisingly, his opponent that day turned out to be too predictable, which even irritated Jinho a little. In addition, Jinho produced very good and strong attacks which he rarely succeeded in. This gave him a lot of confidence, although Jinho understood that at any moment this battle could change not in his favor. Jinho continued to fight, although he behaved somewhat uncertainly that time, despite the fact that victory was closer to him than ever. He dealt blow after blow, but then for some reason he got lost again and received damage himself. He thought it was very ironic that he started the fight wanting to win, but at the same time he was afraid of winning. Jinho spoke out loud to the Demon King, urging him to gain strength. He supported with words and flawlessly attacked his opponent with his hands. Finally, Jinho saw the notification that he had managed to repel the Demon King Azar. His final attack was very strong and he had managed to win. Now he was a real hero because not everyone was lucky enough to get through this boss. Thus Jinho became a champion in 2 worlds. Both achievements were great, but this realization did not make Jinho any easier to bear. He had no equal anywhere. In anger he threw the gaming mouse at the monitor and broke it. He was almost in a hysterical state. Kim Jinho did not understand who he could fight now and thought that it was worth going out against the brown bear. Suddenly a very loud crack was heard outside the window and the whole room was illuminated by lightning. This even slightly frightened the fighter. He was too focused on his thoughts and such sounds with flashes were not very pleasant. It was at that moment that a huge lightning bolt more like a bunch of energy struck the house where he lived right into his apartment. He saw only darkness and felt his head spinning and his whole body burning. When his vision cleared up, he found himself in the rain, surprised by this because he clearly remembered that he had not gone outside. He heard someone's voice calling him to wake up and go. Kim Jinho discovered that he was indeed standing on the street and wearing some kind of orange uniform. Someone put a hand on his shoulder and called him 218, trying to bring him to his senses. Kim Jinho didn't understand for a long time whether they were talking to him or not, but nevertheless decided to turn around at the voice. He saw a fair-haired girl who was already angry that she was not being answered for a long time. She asked Kim Jinho with obvious irritation why he was standing there since there was no time for this at all and they had to leave any minute. Kim Jinho didn't understand who this girl was, but his gaze immediately fell on the patch on her chest, which indicated that she was number 172. Kim Jinho started turning his head and asked where he was. In front of him, he saw a high stone wall with iron lattice gates and several dozen people dressed in the same orange uniform as he was. All these people were running towards the gates. He noticed the flag that stood above the questions. On the yellow cloth was an eagle, and for some reason the symbol was familiar to Kim Jinho. The girl started tugging at his clothes, calling on him to wake up and get himself together if he didn't want to rot in this place for the rest of his life. She screamed that this might be their last chance. She started shaking him again and shouted louder that they might be able to get out of this damned carry-on. Hearing where he was, Kim Jinho was speechless. He looked around again, trying to find out where he ended up in this place which this girl unknown to him had named. He couldn't believe that this place was really carry-on and didn't understand how he got there. Kim Jinho looked around even more carefully with fear. He saw many people in yellow suits running towards the gate. It was clear that they also wanted to escape. The girl shook Kim Jinho again. I said that there was no time to waste and asked him to move. Kim Jinho didn't even know what to say and hoped that everything around him was a dream. But events continued to develop, and with each passing moment he became convinced that this was all pure reality. All the prisoners united and tried to break the gates. Kim Jinho couldn't wake up and began to suspect that he wasn't in a dream after all. He actually found himself inside the game he was playing, and he also became a prisoner. For him all this was very dubious, but he understood that first it was worth getting out of there and ran after that girl. She held him tightly by the wrist and pulled him along. But still doubts got the better of Kim Jinho and he stopped and asked the girl to stop. He told her that everything around was very strange, but she only tried to be indignant about this. Her mother said that there was no time for these doubts. Kim Jinho looked around again and told her that there was no way that something like this could happen in Carry-On because everything was too simple. The girl explained that General Clark was not there. Kim Jinho simply looked at her in surprise. The girl briefly explained to him that General Clark had recently left and so they had a chance to escape from this place. The girl asked Kim Jinho to get ready and run after her, but he grabbed her by the top of her shirt and dragged her along with him. She tried to resist, not understanding what he was doing, and called him crazy. But Kim Jinho thought that if everything around him was true, then he at least understood the situation a little. His champion sense told him that he couldn't go beyond the gates that they were trying to break down. He didn't stop and ran in the opposite direction, not letting go of the girl who was still trying to escape from his grip. Soon the prisoners managed to tear down the gates. Joyful cries were heard that they were finally free. They thoughtlessly, without the slightest doubt, chose to go outside. I think that behind the wall was their freedom. The girl screamed and asked Kim Jinho to let her go because she also wanted to go beyond, but he did not let her go. It seemed to her, like everyone else, that nothing bad could happen if such a rare chance was taken advantage of. But she couldn't even imagine what would happen if she went outside the prison. Some of the first prisoners who managed to escape immediately received a terrible punishment. One of the escaped prisoners had his arm cut off. General Clark did this. He pulled out his sword and mercilessly cut off the prisoner's hand. He immediately fell to the ground at the general's feet, writhing in intense pain. And the other prisoners immediately froze, not daring to take another step. General Clark laughed loudly and called the prisoners worthless. Behind him stood the other prison governors, and he waved his sword forward, ordering them to kill all the prisoners who were trying to escape. The girl didn't understand why General Clark was right outside the gate, but Kim Jinho told her to shut up and run if she didn't realize it was a trap. A bloody massacre began on the territory of Carrion Prison. The prisoners were now running back, trying to save themselves and praying to the higher powers for salvation. The managers did not stop until the last prisoner was killed. All this time the rain did not stop, but it bothered few people. General Clark walked past all the corpses, stepping right through the pools of blood that formed on the ground. He ordered his men to line up all the remaining prisoners who remained on the premises when the gates opened. They were lined up right next to the dead, ordered to stand straight and not move. Kim Jinho glanced at the girl he was trying to escape with. She was looking at the corpses of the prisoners and trying hard to hold back her tears, but she couldn't. Soon the girl began to feel sick, and she was unable to hold back the urge to vomit. The picture before her was not the best. I didn't throw up right in front of myself, although in general this was already a violation of the order not to move. The general immediately approached her, but she was unable to straighten up in front of him due to severe nausea. The general grabbed her by the hair and, rudely reminding her of his orders, hit her with his knee and made it clear to the others that if anyone dared to move they would be stabbed to death. Kim Jinho, seeing that there was no mercy for anyone, understood that another massacre could begin at any moment. After this, General Clark approached Kim Jinho and noted that he was either just lucky or lacked the courage to escape. The general said that all magicians were cowards, and he was ashamed to be an opponent of such people. General Clark leaned close to Kim Jinho's face and promised that he would regret not dying that day, calling him Arahan. He ordered him to wait and walked away, leaving the prisoners to stand motionless in the rain. Kim Jinho lowered his head and looked at the pool of blood under his feet, wondering what was going on. But when he was able to see his reflection in a puddle, he was very surprised because he was actually Arahan. After this fortunate incident, a week passed in a prison labor camp. There was only one daily activity in the form of collecting stone towers. Overall, it was a useless exercise just to make the prisoners work. After a week in Arahan's body, Kim Jinho realized something. Firstly, Arahan's body was very weak, and just lifting one stone made his breathing become out of control, and he was about 15 years old. Secondly, using magic was difficult. Kim Jinho tried to using magic at night when no one was looking, but it didn't work. It was strange to him that Arahan couldn't use magic because the Arahans were the strongest family of magicians. Kim Jinho had a hunch that it was because he couldn't use magic that he was thrown into such a place, and it was similar to what the Arahans would do. One of the managers approached him and ordered him to move the tower from the pile where Kim Jinho was dumping stones to the other side. The warden sat on a chair. He was indignant at Kim Jinho's slowness and ordered him to move. Kim Jinho was terribly angry about what was happening and didn't know how to dull these emotions. The synchronization was delayed due to the large amount of information and was only at 78%. Kim Jinho couldn't wait for it to finish. After work, all prisoners were taken to the canteen for lunch. What was served for lunch was a disgusting stew and a piece of bread. No one gained much strength from such food. After being sent to this prison, Kim Jinho began to exercise regularly, but the only food he needed to increase his strength was this slop. He sat alone until the blonde girl number 172 came up to him and addressed him by number and asked if he would like to eat his bread. Kim Jinho was slightly happy to see her and assured her that he would not eat his bread and gave it to her, which made her extremely happy. Everyone else avoided him, but this girl seemed somehow special. The Archons were the most powerful magicians, and there were rumors about their red eyes, which were a curse for how many people they had killed, and everyone believed that if you look into such eyes you will have an unfortunate encounter with death. He and the girl were about the same age and shared a room. Kim Jinho had no memories of what happened before he came to this place, but it seemed like they were friends. He didn't understand how such a young girl could be in such a place, and suddenly she said that he should have been more careful, and he, surprised, asked why. She explained that because of him everyone's workload had been increased, which the other prisoners weren't too happy about, and suggested that he too relax a little instead of zealously fondling the rocks. This was the common thread between all the murderous looks he'd been getting lately. The girl asked to be especially wary of the 589th, who was the leader of the prisoners and was known in the arena, and they said that he was imprisoned for murder. To this Kim Jinho replied that in that case it would probably also be dangerous for her to go with him, but she noted that the fact that they knew each other could not be hidden anyway. Kim Jinho, getting up from the table, noted that she could have interfered with this and asked not to go somewhere. The girl tensed up, not understanding why her friend had become so harsh. Immediately after these words, the sounds of footsteps were heard, which accelerated, turning into running. Kim Jinho stood up from the table and told the girl that what she was worried about would soon happen. The girl saw a crowd of prisoners heading straight for them, and her face twisted in horror. It was really very scary. She would also have discovered that among this crowd was the leader of prisoners number 589. The entire crowd stopped about 1.5 meters away from them. It was very quiet, but this silence made it clear what was happening. Kim Jinho stepped forward a little, covering his friend with his body, and waited to see what would happen next. The leader turned to Ericon, noting that according to rumors it was because of him that everyone had more work. Kim Jinho Erahan, without showing any fear, replied that it could be allowed. After which he wanted to add that he wanted to do some sports, but then he saw a huge fist flying straight at his head. The leader practically pressed Kim Jinho into the concrete floor with all his strength and didn't blink an eye. 172nd screamed in fear, greatly worried about her friend. But it turned out that Kim Jinho managed to grab the leader by the collar, who did not foresee this at all. Kim Jinho smiled while looking straight into his eyes. No one could have imagined that this fight could continue. Kim Jinho swayed slightly and delivered a knee strike to the head of the prisoner leader. For Kim Jinho's friend number 172, it was very surprising to see this, because previously he was not the type to fight back. The prisoners were worried about their leader and were also surprised that he was hit. But it was also a surprise for Kim Jinho when the leader, smiling, expressed indignation at what had happened and asked what the guy was doing. He seemed to feel nothing at all, and the smile on his face was completely disconcerting. When the leader of the prisoners lifted Kim Jinho by the collar, he was completely upset at how weak his body was, considering that before all this story he was an absolute champion in fighting. The leader lifted the guy up as if it took no effort at all, wanting to throw him like some kind of trash. He threw Kim Jinho very far and hard without worrying about the possible serious negative consequences for the guy's health. 172nd was completely confused and could not help her friend in any way. And the leader threatened that the guy would be finished and he would not be able to escape anywhere. Kim Jinho was really unwell. After he fell, he couldn't recover quickly from the strong blow. But this state did not last long for him. At that moment, he received a notification that the synchronization progress had reached 100%. The synchronization was complete, which made him smile widely, knowing that now the leader himself could get into trouble. Kim Jinho stood up with a smile in front of the crowd of prisoners who were waiting for the leader, but Kim Jinho was no longer as weak as before he received the boss's blow. Power was boiling within him. His hands felt this power and trembled with frenzy. He also felt the strength in his legs, which were filled with energy. Kim Jinho was ready to crush the entire crowd of prisoners who were angry with him. The first thing he did was to stretch his arms to feel his strength to the fullest. Afterwards, he got into the correct position. He took up his position and was fully prepared for the upcoming fight. Kim Jinho smiled and called the leader of the prisoners to him. This only made the leader laugh. He considered this courage to be rather stupid on the part of the others. The leader began to approach Kim Jinho and, shaking his hands, expressed indignation that the guy had even been thrown out of the family, and he had imagined himself to be someone incomprehensible. Kim Jinho, remaining in his position, called on the leader to fight and not to wag his tongue, mocking that it seemed like he was just chickening out. The leader rushed at Kim Jinho, saying that he intended to fulfill his wish. Kim Jinho was expecting this and was ready to counterattack, dodging his opponent's blow. Immediately after, he counterattacked the leader of the prisoners and struck him with a kick and a swing. But before he struck right after the kick with a fist, Kim Jinho paused for a moment. The leader grabbed his arm sharply and made the desired blow impossible. He smirked and said that the rats should know their place, addressing Kim Jinho. But immediately after these words, Kim Jinho rushed at him and dealt him several blows, after which he managed to escape from the hands of the leader of the prisoners while he was trying to recover from the damage he had received. Kim Jinho's blows were indeed very strong, and the leader was not immediately able to come to his senses and get his bearings. Kim Jinho took advantage of this opportunity by delivering another kick to the leader's face. Kim Jinho's kick cut the leader's chin and left him severely stunned. As the leader began to bend towards the ground, Kim Jinho kicked him again, spinning in the air. This blow was even stronger than the previous one, and even such a big guy as the leader of the prisoners could not withstand it. Kim Jinho lost his balance from the blow but managed to land on his hands. Standing on his feet, Kim Jinho immediately looked back at his opponent, who didn't even try to move. He lay very still, his mouth slightly open but his eyes closed. His breathing was barely noticeable. Kim Jinho, realizing that he had won, noted that Lael had no intention of using his legs in this fight. Seeing that the leader had been defeated, the entire crowd of prisoners rushed at Kim Jinho to take revenge. They did not just want to beat him up. Kim Jinho, as if not paying attention to this, calmly approached the leader. He stepped sharply and forcefully on his back in the area of the ridge, after which he shouted to the prisoners and ordered them to stop. From such a surprise, everyone really froze in place. Kim Jinho grabbed the leader of the prisoners by the arm and pulled it back hard, still pressing his foot on his back, and warned that if anyone moved, they would have to spoon-feed the leader for the rest of their lives. He advised the prisoners to bring the warden, and they were stunned by this statement. Kim Jinho, seeing the puzzled faces of the prisoners, noted that he was not joking at all and suggested tearing off the leader's hand to gain more trust in himself. One of the prisoners jumped up and rushed to the exit of the dining room, shouting that he would definitely bring the guard. He realized that it was better not to argue with that guy. The other prisoners rushed to help their leader and began trying to get him to his feet and take him away. Meanwhile, Kim Jinho's girlfriend ran up to him. The dining room immediately became much quieter, although by all appearances this was only the beginning of loud noises in that prison. 172nd, with delight in her eyes and almost jumping with curiosity, asked Kim Jinho where he learned to fight like that, admiring how cool it was. Then the girl noticed that Kim Jinho for some reason became significantly taller than her, although it always seemed to her that they were almost the same height, and she decided to ask about this too. Kim Jinho sat down on a bench and explained to her that all this was because of carrying stones, and advised the girl to do the same, although she did not understand what stones had to do with growth. Synchronization did transfer all his readings from reality to the game, but he still had the body of a child. Real readings were important to him, and he decided to do that. After studying the characteristics of his character, he discovered that he was not the owner of magic at all. Not the power rose to 0. He hoped it was a mistake because his character was the mage Arahan and he couldn't have 0 magic. He didn't understand why he possessed such a loser. 172nd watched as her friend simply sat on the bed and poked his fingers in the air, and did not understand why, not even guessing how everything was actually arranged in his case. Kim Jinho decided to lie down and stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything. He couldn't come to terms with his characteristics and was disappointed that such losers as he now was actually existed. The only assumption he had was that he was thrown out of his family and deprived of magic. Kim Jinho understood that he was only getting more upset and even angry, so he decided to calm down and slowly check everything. He decided to be glad that at least all his other characteristics were worth the full points. In general, he didn't care about his fines because in such a lousy body he wouldn't be able to use everything to the maximum, and he decided that he could try to work off the fines by hardening. But the problem was the small amount of good food, which prevented him from gaining strength. But it was also the first time that Kim Jinho saw features like his characters, which were still of a high rank. He knew only the steadfastness and the winner in hopeless situations that he himself received while playing this game. If the magic wasn't at 0, he might have thought that it was a cheating character, but everything was in another reality. There was no cheating there. Even though he considered all this nonsense, he decided that he would gradually learn the rest. Hearing someone in the corridor say that the numbers that would be called should come out, he stood up and finally decided that he would find out everything with his characteristics and decide. The numbers of the prisoners began to be announced, and everyone began to go outside one by one, and that was what was ordered. They walked one after the other, their heads down, their hands cuffed. Kim Jinho asked his friend who these people were, and she explained that they were sentenced to death if, and most likely they were called to the last dinner. 172 explained that during this lunch prisoners were allowed to eat whatever they wanted before they died, and this gave Kim Jinho an idea. After realizing this idea, he asked what the name of 172nd was, and the girl was surprised by such a question because they had previously called each other only by numbers. She smiled and introduced herself as Ryu. She was from a poor family and had no last name, as she immediately explained, and asked a similar question to Kim Jinho. He introduced himself as Zed Arahan and smiled contentedly, thinking his idea through to the end. He asked if Ryu wanted to get out of prison. The girl froze as she was about to lie down on the bed. She was very confused by such a question, but she really wanted to get out. She lay down and, putting her hands behind her head, said that she did not intend to stay in such a place for long and emphasized that she had a reason to leave quickly, to which Zed Arahan asked if she had thought about how to escape. Ryu said that the only way to escape from the prison was through the gate, the key to which was only in the hands of the general. Zed Arahan asked if she was going to knock the general down and take the keys from him. Ryu said that Zed Arahan was not quite right in the head because the general, although retired, was still a knight of the Fifth Circle. General Clark was a classic knight full of hatred for mages. In the world of the Last Savior, knights and mages hated each other, and Kim Jinho, who temporarily turned out to be Zed Arahan, knew this well. But Kim Jinho didn't understand whether he would be able to defeat this general in such a body and began to think out loud about another way. Ryo interrupted him and said that the key could have simply been stolen and smiled. She noted with a smile that children from the lower classes like her stuck their hands in other people's pockets more often than they greeted them, and added that the general always had a lot of eyes on him, and there were few opportunities to steal keys. Kim Jinho thought about Ryu's words and remained silent for a while, continuing to look at her. After thinking, he grinned, and one could understand that a good plan had matured in his head. He gradually began to understand how to escape from prison and was very happy about it. The next day, like all the previous ones, began with work. Before the work began, the overseer announced to the prisoners that the general had once again decided to increase the workload, and now they would not just have to walk but run. The prisoners rebelled. They were outraged that they were not being treated humanely and given impossible tasks, but the guard noted that they were disobeying the general's orders, and everyone fell silent. The leader of the prisoners, after silence had fallen, said that it was indeed very difficult. After his words, the warden immediately put the tip of his sword to his throat, warning him that he shouldn't say any more. The warden noted that he was only transmitting the general's orders, and that the complaints should not be made to him, but the leader did not calm down and tried to find out the reason for the order, noting that this was already too much. The warden glanced at him from under his cap, surprised by such a question, which in his opinion was very stupid. He was almost outraged that the prisoners did not understand why they were receiving such orders. After these words, many looked at Kim Jinho, who was not the first time the reason for the increased work. The supervisor coughed, letting everyone know that the reason for the hard work was Kim Jinho, after which the warden walked away, hiding behind the fact that he had to smoke. Ryu looked at Zed with concern, noting that the atmosphere was clearly not friendly, to which he asked her to move as far away as possible. He silently cursed Clark, who was clearly provoking the conflict. The general could not do it himself, so he hoped that the criminals would do it for him. It was strange that the smooth knight was capable of such meanness. Ryu didn't even try to argue with Zed's request and immediately ran away from him and all the other prisoners. She understood that this time the guards were in cahoots with the leader of the prisoners, and it wouldn't be easy like last time. She was worried because Zed couldn't die. The prisoners formed a crowd and tried to surround Zed Arahan. They wanted to kill him, knowing that if they did not, they would die. Zed Arahan smiled and noted that the prisoners understood everything correctly and nothing could be done about it. The prisoners laughed at him, and that the blood of Arahan played in him until the very end, although he could only bluff. After which they rushed at him. Kim Jinho, as Zed Arahan, met his opponents with a knee strike. He hit the head of the one who wanted to beat him first. Some, seeing such a blow, immediately hesitated, not wanting to risk and come closer. Kim Jinho shouted that he couldn't just stand there and wait to be killed, and that he needed to at least let off some steam, for which they called him crazy and only wanted to finish him off faster. He liked that situation. He met his opponents with a smile on his face and knew for sure that he would win. He only tried harder to anger them and deliberately called them to him. His fists itched with the desire to smash as many faces as possible into the disgusting people that were the prisoners. All the prisoners ran straight towards him, hoping that, as a crowd, they would be able to get rid of this guy. Kim Jinho thought about how he once imagined this in the octagon. He dreamed of being attacked by a crowd, not one by one. He wanted to test his strength, although he knew in advance that he could defeat many enemies at once. Then he wanted to try to fight with even more opponents, and his thoughts were occupied only with this. He shouted at the prisoners, calling on them to advance more actively, and continued to smile contentedly. Even though there were many opponents, he managed to keep an eye on them all. Not a single movement of his was useless and pulled him towards victory. One by one he struck his enemies and was glad for each of them. He was insanely fast and no one could get ahead of him or even slightly touch him. Someone would get punched in the face several times in a row before Kim Jinho would move on to someone else. Ryu watched the carnage from the sidelines and was amazed at how her friend was performing. She partly couldn't even believe that it was really him because previously he had not had the slightest hint of such skills. To her surprise, a rough voice came from behind her. The prisoner who had found her was clearly pleased. The other prisoners continued to fight and threw themselves at Kim Jinho with all their strength, receiving blows and falling unconscious. The leader was very angry that his men could not overcome the boy as a crowd and shouted that they were just standing there. Eventually, the leader of the prisoners ordered the men to attack all at once, and Kim Jinho was glad that this happened. He felt a sense of pleasure when he avoided being hit, and Kim Jinho also received incredible satisfaction from his accurate strikes. His eyes were burning from the fact that he finally felt these emotions and got a taste for it. He wished that this slaughter would not end as much as possible. He must have craved such emotions too much. With each blow, it was not enough for him, and he wanted to feel his strength for more time. He literally went crazy at that moment, and it seemed he could no longer stop. But suddenly, when the prisoners were already struggling to get up and were completely unable to do anything, Kim Jinho heard footsteps behind him. They turned to him, and he, having finished off another of the attackers, turned towards the voice. The prisoner smiled slyly and asked to stop trying and take care of his girlfriend. Behind him stood another one and held Ryu. Ryu hoarsely screamed Zed's name. It was obvious how scared and in pain she was. The prisoner assumed that Arahan did not want to save his friend, and in response saw Zed's angry look. At that moment, he felt a surge of hatred towards these people. He shouted at them, calling them scum, wanting to attract all their attention to himself. When they both looked at him, Kim Jinho smiled and noted that they had made a big mistake. Kim Jinho was angry that those scum decided to act so meanly. They continued to hold Ryu tightly and could have broken her neck at any moment, and the prisoner laughed, pointing out that Kim Jinho could only wag his tongue. He took a sharpening knife from his bosom and said that he was a knight of the second circle who could easily deal with Arahan without magic, and it was an honor for the boy to stand against such an opponent. With these words, the prisoner rushed off and headed towards Kim Jinho. He screamed that Kim Jinho only had to die and that he didn't deserve anything more. Kim Jinho didn't seem too nervous as he was confident in his abilities. He carefully watched his enemy's movements. The prisoner jumped and thrust the knife, confident in his aim, but only got the blade stuck in the mud. Kim Jinho suddenly disappeared right in front of his nose, and the prisoner didn't even have time to notice. Immediately after his disappearance, the prisoner heard a dull sound behind him, followed immediately by voices. Turning around, he discovered that Kim Jinho had already managed to free the girl by knocking out the second prisoner. The prisoner was confused. He demanded to know how the boy could do such a thing since he couldn't use magic. Kim Jinho smirked and replied that this trick was not some kind of magic at all. Kim Jinho has changed his position dramatically and has become more correct. After that, he moved very quickly and sharply towards the last prisoner. In just a few seconds, the prisoner saw Kim Jinho's face right in front of him. Everything happened so quickly that the prisoner became scared and almost screamed. He would have definitely screamed if Kim Jinho hadn't kicked him, stunning him badly. The prisoner instantly lost consciousness and fell sliding through the mud. As soon as the prisoner fell into the yard, General Clark and the prison guards came out. The general immediately called out Kim Jinho's number. His face was as serious as usual. He looked at Kim Jinho and the unconscious prisoners scattered around the yard and demanded an explanation. But Ryu, without letting Kim Jinho speak, asked to listen to her and said that in fact the victim was number 218. She said that she was taken hostage in 218 and they were going to kill her, and he had no choice but to defend himself. General Clark silently surveyed the area once more. It was almost impossible to tell what he was thinking from his face, but he only thought that the prisoners were fools who could not cope with the boy as a crowd. General Clark said he had only one question and asked if the 218th had any mana. Kim Jinho was a little confused and replied that he didn't know for sure because he really didn't know. General Clark used his energy and did not spread it to the fallen prisoners. He ordered them to breathe, and every single one of them began to rise slowly like puppets on strings. But Ryu, on the contrary, fainted. This energy affected her differently, and apparently that's what General Clark wanted. But Kim Jinho did not receive any damage from the general's energy, although he understood that it was impossible to resist the power of the Fifth Circle Knight. Kim Jinho could not figure out what was going on. Looking at the characteristics, he saw that he had the feature of the champion's soul, which gave resistance to suppression, and he was stunned because it was comparable to immunity. Realizing this, Kim Jinho was completely delighted because this gave him more opportunities. In the real world, his body reached the top and Kim Jinho could not grow anymore. But in the game, he was able to become a friend. He even thought that it was a shame to spend so much on some knight. General Clark was amazed that the 218th stood firm on its feet and did not succumb to his force. He considered him just some worthless guy who didn't even have mana, although he was from a family of magicians. General Clark was not satisfied with this and decided that it was worth using more energy, so that the young man would not be able to cope with it. He multiplied his suppressive energy and directed it at Kim Jinho. It was obvious that he was squeezing everything out of himself. But Kim Jinho continued to stand as if nothing had happened with his hands on his hips. The energy had a very strong effect on the prisoners. They stood obediently on all fours and did not even move from their place with their heads bowed. The peculiarity of the 218th rebuffed General Clark's strength, no matter how hard he tried, and this brought a satisfied smile to the boy's face. Kim Jinho thought that his strength was greater than that of a rank S, and he wondered what the general would do next. General Clark did not understand how this was even possible. He gaped in amazement and did not understand how to subjugate the prisoner to his will. One of the guards watching the events turned to General Clark, but he clicked his teeth, warning that it would be better for everyone to remain silent. General Clark stopped trying, and Kim Jinho was glad about this because he already thought that the general would take me and wave him around in despair. Kim Jinho continued to stand and smile as he looked at General Clark, waiting for what he would say. The general was incredibly angry because he couldn't subdue some boy, especially in front of the guards. The general turned around abruptly and ordered the prisoners and guards to return to work and walked away, but Kim Jinho asked him to stop. The young man noted that he had something to say, and the general became even more indignant about this but still stopped. Kim Jinho said he was tired of building towers and thinking about when he would be attacked next. The young man came a little closer to the general and said that he wanted to be allowed to simply die. Ryu, who had already come to her senses but continued to kneel, asked her friend what it all meant, but he did not answer her. He spoke with the general and told him that he would like to be sentenced to death. General Clark became even more indignant and asked if the boy understood what his words meant, because if this was a momentary whim, then he would not be spared. Kim Jinho came even closer and noted that the general was simply afraid that he was passionate and suggested writing it down in a crystal ball, and the general noted that there would be no better proof. The general shouted to the guards and asked them to bring the crystal ball quickly. Kim Jinho also showed the video of the general being happy about what he was asked to do. Kim Jinho turned to him again and said that he had heard that before death, the prisoner was allowed to eat whatever he wanted and therefore wanted to decide on the menu. Kim Jinho asked to feed him vertisan beef and noted that he did not want so much that his stomach would burst, to which the guards were indignant that he had gone crazy because he was a death row inmate and wanted a lot of this dish. Vertisan beef was the highest quality meat from cows raised in the southern part of the empire on the free meadows of Verdi. In The Last Savior, it was one of the most precious types of food. Its taste gave an unknown power, and its description stated that if you eat it, you can win in battle. Kim Jinho asked if this was not a fee for his life and stated that if he was considered not of high rank, he would not agree with it, and warned that if he was deceived, their contract would be cancelled. Ryu asked the 218th if he really wanted this, and he looked at her and replied that it was so, after which he pointed his finger at her and said that the girl should go with him and they should eat together until they were full. Ryu, hearing this, was taken aback and tried to avoid this event. The general did not argue and promised that he would do everything as prisoner 218 asked. Ryu, hearing her friend negotiate with General Clark about her life, asked how they could not take into account her opinion. Kim Jayak reflected that vertisan beef was so expensive that it took a week to get one. During this time, he did not have to work, he was fed food by a guard, and he could also devote all his time to sports. Ryu was very depressed, and looking at how Kim Jinho was training, she said that she did not understand this because they would soon die. Kim Jinho was fixated on his plan. The Last Savior had a special system. When a stat exceeded 100, the accumulated points would begin to move to the next one. All his stats were at their maximum, meaning that increasing them would transfer points into magic. That's why he didn't stop training until the warden came to him. When their numbers were called, and they asked to leave the cell, Jinho was very happy compared to Ryu, who was devastated that her life would end in prison. The warden responded to another place where a table had been set for them with the dishes that Jinho had ordered. The vertisan beef looked very appetizing. Jinho and Ryu each put one steak on their plates to start. Although Ryu was very worried about her fate, she thoroughly enjoyed the wonderful dinner. She said that it was the first time in her life that she had eaten something so delicious, and Jinho asked her not to forget that all this food was thanks to him. As he began to eat, Jinho found that, with each bite, all of his experience points seemed to be added at once. His first goal had been achieved, and all that remained was to bide his time. Meanwhile, the warden, having taken the prisoners to lunch, went to the general and reported this, and he gave orders to ensure that no one interfered with this process. General Clark tried to understand what kind of day it was that there was not a drop of resistance on the face of prisoner 218. It seemed to the general that all his energy was passing by the 218th and did not touch him at all. He also clearly remembered how his face had fallen out, especially his eyes. This was to his credit because although he was retired, he was still a knight of the Fifth Circle, and he believed that it was impossible for some young mage without mana to withstand his strength. The general thought that he must have made a mistake in something that time and promised that this time he would do everything appropriately. He looked at his bracelet with a purple stone and promised himself that he would return to the boy the shame he had experienced many times over. Soon Jinho and Ryu finished their meal and were even surprised that they were able to eat everything. Sighing heavily from oversaturation, Ryu noted that she no longer felt sorry to die, to which Jinho smiled at her and said that it was not the time for that. Jinho stood up and stretched his arms. He was full of energy, and it even seemed to him that he could punch a punching bag for a day, which made him even more impatient to try this power as soon as possible. Soon the doors to the cell where they were located opened. Jinho smiled with joy that this moment had finally arrived and General Clark had come. He even joked that the general was wrong about them not being able to eat everything and showed the empty plates on the table. The general first called the boy by number and then immediately called him by name. Jinho, sitting relaxed on a chair, joked that he was probably offended that there was nothing left. Jinho didn't even think about acting in any way constrained and looked into the general's eyes with a brazen smile. General Clark thought that the boy was just an impudent fellow believing only in his pedigree without even guessing what was about to happen. The general very slowly raised his hand, which was wearing a bracelet, and reached out to Jinho. He took him by the shoulder, wondering what he would do with the boy first. The general couldn't help but smile at the thought that he would be able to take such sweet revenge on the prisoner who had behaved too self-confidently. Jinho didn't even flinch when the general grabbed him by the shoulder, wanting to make his face distort into a grimace of suffering, and continued to smile into his eyes. General Clark knew that the Arikans were the most elite family of mages, and Jinho thought that even the smallest bit of information could play into his hands. It was with the help of even a small amount of information that it was possible to get out of this hole. Jinho looked closely at the general's hand, or rather at his bracelet with a stone from which energy emanated. He immediately realized that it was a magical artifact. They were a simple trinket. General Clark, watching as the boy could not resist his energy, was already happy. But his joy didn't last long. There was no fear in Jinho's eyes. Instead, there was a huge confidence. General Clark was again confused by the prisoner's continued resistance. He was incredibly angry at the current circumstances, and if he could, he would have crushed the boy. Ryu, unlike her friend, could not resist this energy and suffered from it. Jinho did not retreat, and on the contrary angered the general even more by shouting that he should have behaved appropriately. This really infuriated General Clark even more, and together with the prisoner's self-confident appearance, he fell into a rage. He squeezed out all the strength he could, trying to suppress Jinho and fulfill his previous request. The general put out so much energy that even the 218th began to feel a little discomfort. The general also held the boy's hand tightly, minimizing any possibility of his resistance. But Jinho was not going to give in even a little, and pulling his hand away, repeated that he asked him to behave normally, and noted that if the general wanted to kill him, he should have done it appropriately and not show off. General Clark saw that the guy easily escaped from his fight and became even more confused because he even used an artifact, but the prisoner could still hold out. The general was shocked that the boy was not affected by magic at all, and for this to happen he had to be one circle higher than him, that is sixth. He did not believe that this was possible, and he had no words at all. This can only be explained by the fact that it was in the blood of the Archon. It took General Clark his entire life to get to the fifth circle, and even despite this, he couldn't bring the small mage to his knees in front of him using all his strength. Even the artifact was useless against this boy. Soon the artifact, unable to withstand such a load, went out. Jinho, without retreating, looked at the general and asked if he had finished. General Clark did not answer. The room they were in was very quiet. After some deliberation, the general announced that the execution would take place the next morning and warned that even though the boy was an arachne, he would not be able to go against the imperial law. After this, General Clark went to his office. He lit a candle and took out several scrolls and an inkwell. After that, he took out a book and began to make some notes. He still didn't fully understand everything, but he assumed that what was happening could be useful information for the knights. He wanted to write down everything that happened during the past day so that others could also know about it. General Clark was very tired. He had used up all of his mana and artifact and had no strength left, but he wanted to finish his report. Meanwhile, Jinho and Ryu were left in a separate cell. They were supposed to spend the night there while awaiting their execution. Ryu couldn't sleep. The moonlight was shining right in her face, and why was the sun shining on everyone? Jinho approached her and asked how she was feeling. The girl said that she felt disgusting and was very nauseous. Jinho, but he smiled and emphasized that she had very dexterous hands, and the girl found this amusing. She raised her hand a little and showed that she had keys in her sleeve and very happily emphasized what skills she had. Jinho praised her and thought to himself that for an ordinary person this would be dangerous, but the girl was a master at her craft. Ryu explained that it was because the general was focused on Jinho and then asked if he really didn't care about the general's energy. When Jinho assured her that he was fine, the girl frowned and said that it was strange that she didn't know anything about him. He said that it was all because of the stones. He also understood that the girl was very right and he was unrealistically strong. All his indicators increased by 10 units, which was a great result, and it turns out the rumors were not lying about the benefits of beef. He felt big changes in himself, and this feeling was pleasant. He wanted to get rid of all the fines as soon as possible, but you knew that it would be very difficult. Thinking about this, he turned to Ryu and told her that they should get out tonight and asked her to gather strength, although the girls thought it was strange because the general could notice the loss of the keys. Jinho asked her not to worry, being sure that General Clark was already fast asleep. Ryu's eyes widened. I don't understand how the 218th was so sure of this. Jinho video bracelet on the general's hand knew that it was a thing that instantly released mana and took away all the power, although he did not remember the exact name of such a trinket. I know the information about this bracelet. Jinho was sure that the general was fast asleep, which was actually true. With General Clark showing up to dinner with the keys, Jinho's plan became even simpler. And also the fact that he had a bracelet on his hand that took away all the power played into Jinho's hands. Jinho thought while waiting for Ryu to rest and think through the smallest details of their escape. When it was deep into the night, Jinho decided that he and Ryu should walk slowly. The girl was afraid that everything would not go very well, to which Jinho suggested that she stay if it was so scary, and she immediately calmed down, realizing that this was her last hope for freedom. When she reached one of the doors, the girl noticed that there were no keys on the bunch and asked what they were going to do. Jinho looked at the door and asked the girl to move away. It seemed like it would have been nothing for him to kick down that door, which is what he actually did, greatly surprising Ryu with this. She didn't understand what kind of power he had and asked him to explain whether he was really a magician and not someone else. The guards came running at the noise of the door being knocked down and immediately noticed them and demanded to explain what was happening. Jinho chuckled and replied that what the guards saw was happening. He didn't hide the fact that they were trying to escape. The guards immediately rushed towards them, trying to prevent the prisoners from escaping, and Jinho and Ryu had to run away very quickly. Well, there was one more obstacle ahead of them, which Ryu had informed them about. The gates leading to freedom from the prison were blocked by guards. They were serious and did not want to let the prisoners through just like that. But Jinho, on the contrary, sped up and ran straight towards them. The head of security ordered his men to stop the prisoners at all costs. No one was going to retreat. Kim Jinho sped up even more and asked Ryu not to stop under any circumstances and to just run straight. The girl doubted the correctness of this action but promised that she would do so despite her great fear. Kim Jinho had to manage to deal with all the guards and open the gate so that they could escape. Kim Jinho didn't even imagine that something might not work out for him and immediately attacked the first of the guards. The guard met him with a saber, and when he struck he only hit the air. The guard didn't even have time to notice how Kim Jinho grabbed him by the head and pushed him back. The guard was unable to stay on his feet and fell on the rest of the crowd of his men, knocking them off their feet as well. Some of the guards were injured by the unexpectedness of what was happening, wounding their own. They didn't expect the boy to have such strength because despite his several victories against the leader of the prisoners, they still considered him a loser. The boy's actions only made the guards even more angry, but they simply did not have time to follow the prisoner's movements. Kim Jinho was incredibly fast, and the only thing the guards saw was the boy's hand that was about to grab them. Kim Jinho pushed some of the guards and dealt a strong blow to others, knocking them down. No one could even touch such a Jinho without getting seriously injured and being eliminated from this fight. It didn't take the 218th very long to deal with all the guards that blocked his path. As soon as they rose, they fell back onto their comrades, simply huddling together. After a very short time, they were all beaten up, and what's more, they were very confused and could not stand up straight and fight. Kim Jinho wouldn't even be very careful with her movements. He simply rushed at the crowd, and no one could touch him with even the edge of a sword blade. The guards shouted to each other that the boy should be killed immediately. Well, no one managed to inflict even the slightest injury on this boy who was like lightning. Kim Jinho used both his hands and feet to strike the guards. At the same time, he could neutralize two people at once, considering that these people were sufficiently prepared since they were watching the prison. The guards didn't give up. I tried to do everything possible to prevent an escape. I know that besides these two prisoners were death row inmates. Kim Jinho tried to deal with them as quickly as possible, maneuvering between the sharp swords and dodging any blows. He dealt blow after blow to each of the guards, and they could barely get to their feet. Whenever one of the guards fell into the winter and took too long to recover, Kim Jinho would attack them again and finish them off. The amazing thing was that he alone could fight against a whole crowd of trained fighters. There was not a hint of confusion or fear on his face. He acted clearly and was very attentive to everything that was happening around him. There was more of a madness on his face. He was clearly enjoying the fact that he could fight so many opponents at once. He tested his body and strength and got a positive result and began to believe in himself even more. Ryu could only watch from afar and was amazed by what she was seeing. When everything was over and Kim Jinho and Ryu were able to escape from his office, the general came out and hurried to the scene. But the only thing he saw was his people lying unconscious and scattered around the gate. Some of them had already come to their senses and, rising, sincerely asked for forgiveness for the fact that they could not do anything. General Clark looked at the open gates and was filled with incredible anger. He quickly realized that the 218th had managed to escape after all, since no one else would likely have risked doing so, especially after the recent massacre. General Clark ordered his men to go in search of the escaped prisoner, and having captured him, bring him back. Kim Jinho and Ryu went to the Mota village near the colony. They carefully made their way through the streets of the village, trying to disappear as much as possible. Ryu carefully peered out from her hiding place to make sure they were safe. They hid in the barrels, and the girl, seeing that there was no one nearby, whispered to her friend that they had apparently gotten away. Kim Jinho asked where they had ended up, and the girl explained which village they had come to and emphasized that there was nothing else around the colony. Kim Jinho noted that they would most likely come to this village first, and the girl replied that there was nothing else to do because the other cities were far away, and if they mixed with the crowd, then everything would be fine. The girl rummaged through one of the drawers and handed Kim Jinho one of the shirts and asked him to put it on, although he was indignant that the clothes chosen were the worst. Ryu explained that the village was full of poor people and that by wearing such clothes they could easily blend in. After they changed, Ryu asked her friend to keep a low profile while she gathered the bare necessities. Kim Jinho was surprised because they didn't have money, to which the girl replied that they didn't need it. The girl looked at Kim Jinho again, and noting that he was her last hope, asked him not to go anywhere. Ryu returned an hour later and was very pleased to note that she had gotten hold of colored lenses. She explained that red eyes gave away the Arikans and that one should be careful with this, and since they were on the land of the Bahals, blue lenses were popular. The Bahal family was well known to Kim Jinho, as in reality his game character was Teros Bahal, with whom he played the game to the very end. His current character was from the Ahan clan of mages, but he knew quite a bit about it. And Teros Bahal was from the clan of the Bahal Knights, and he knew a lot about them. These two clans were at odds, and even their eye colors were opposite to each other. Jinho thanked Ryu for her concern, and the girl assured him that there was nothing wrong with it, and said that on the way back she found a place where she could rest. After which, having acquired a more local appearance, they went to the place where the girl had found them to spend the night and gain strength and also figure out where to go next. The girl led Jinho to the stable nearby. They immediately lay down on the soft hay to take a nap. Before going to bed, Jinho tried to understand how it happened that he ended up in the game and also in the role of a prisoner, just blinking an eye, although overall he was having quite a good time. He was also interested in why Ryu followed him everywhere. The girl called him her last hope and knew for sure that she would always be in danger as long as she stayed close. He also knew nothing about the girl except that she was a street thief. Jinho stayed with her because he needed help. Ryu also did not fall asleep right away and was wondering whether she could trust her prison friend. In the morning, Jinho and Ryu woke up to the warm rays of the sun that were shining through the stable window. Jinho sat up in his bed and grimaced in disgust at what he had to sleep on. He would never have fallen asleep in this place if he had been able to see anything at all at night. Ryu, stretching, sweetly joked that such a noble aristocrat as he was probably a little uncomfortable, emphasizing that people learned to live in accordance with what they could afford. Jinsa didn't quite agree with this and decided that they needed to earn some money to at least have something to live on. Ryu was surprised how he was going to do this since he couldn't be seen by the guard and offered to teach him how to steal. Jinho refused such an offer and asked what is the best thing a girl can help with. It would be to find a ring. There were actually battles in this village. They were in a more hidden place and were called underground battles. Everything happened according to the classic rules when two participants entered the ring and fought until one was defeated. This was very familiar to Jinho, and he knew for sure that through fighting they would be able to earn good money. Ryu felt unsure of herself in this place and kept looking around, unlike Jinho, whose eyes immediately lit up. Ryu looked around, seeing the ring and the crowd of fans, and whispered to Jinho that they had apparently come to the wrong place. Jinho smiled and assured the girl that they had come to the right place. Ryu watched the fight and saw how one of the opponents bit the other on the arm and tore off a piece of flesh with his teeth. He jumped back at this trick and swung his arm at his offender so that he went off to the side. Their sparring continued in the same vein. These were two huge men who gave it their all. They were generally on equal terms, receiving blows from each other almost in turn. The crowd was screaming at the top of their lungs, encouraging their favorites. The fans were betting all the money they had on their heroes. Jinho expected that he would end up in a street fight, but it turned out to be even tougher than he imagined, although Ryu was not at all comfortable and wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. Her great surprise was that all those present came to this place of their own free will and enjoyed the show a lot. People liked to watch fighters in the ring smashing each other's faces without worrying about the consequences. Blood, saliva, and sweat splashed in all directions and even landed on the spectators. The fighters fought to the last until one of them fell and was no longer able to rise. Ryu, with huge round eyes, asked Jinho if people in this place didn't kill each other, noting that Ikazu's strength could not compare with any of the carry-on prisoners. She said directly that she doubted that Jinho would be able to defeat him with her grip, but when she turned around, her friend was no longer around. The crowd suddenly fell silent and their eyes widened just like Ryu's. Ikazu's huge broken fist, blood dripping onto the floor, froze in the air. Jinho held him and was indignant that Ikazu was beating his opponent despite the fact that he was already unconscious. Jinho looked at the big guy with disdain and advised him to fight according to the rules. Ikazu did not expect such impudence and was even slightly confused by this turn of events. Ryo was the most worried, and she didn't push her mouth, gaping in a silent scream, worried that her friend would be smeared across the floor. Jinho turned to the referee and began to curse at him for not fulfilling his duties. The young man was outraged that the referee did not stop the fight if the winner was already decided. Isaac came to his senses and pulled his hand away from Jinho's. He was also angry and demanded Jinho to introduce himself and explain himself, thinking that if there was an aristocrat in front of him, he would be even more infuriated. Kim Jinho did not tolerate any nonsense and was surprised that it was not obvious who he was. The crowd did not make a sound and watched in amazement to see what would happen next. Kim Jinho noted that he was a homeless person from the street and grinned, knowing what he was getting into. The crowd immediately started making noise when they heard who was entering the ring. And I liked that some poor guy dared to get involved in a fight that had just become interesting. Kim Jinho began to play to the crowd, and noting that the hall had become too noisy, promised that he would take full responsibility upon himself and offered to resolve this conflict by entering the ring. Kim Jinho smiled and pointed his finger at Isaac, asking the crowd to wait a bit and promised to show something very interesting. Rio couldn't stand it and screamed, trying to stop her stupid friend. She started screaming that there was no place for them here because Isaac was 100 times stronger than all those prisoners and the chances of winning were negligible. She demanded to choose another opponent or leave the underground battles. Kim Jinho, understanding how much the girl was worried, was a little confused himself, but still asked her not to make noise and to go and put all the money on him. Hearing this, the girl rebelled even more and accused him of madness. But Kim Jinho didn't respond to her demands, which made her even more worried. He simply smiled and offered her to eat beef once again, but only after the fight. The crowd accepted Kim Jinho's offer, and soon the referee announced the start of the fight. Isaac was outraged that they were interfering with his work and insisted that the worthless poor man who came out to fight him had completely gone crazy from his poverty. The fighter himself did not believe at all that this skinny boy would be able to hold out against him for even a few seconds. But as soon as they entered the ring, Isaac noticed that there was something unusual about him. And although the boy looked about 15 years old, his gaze was completely different and his breathing was surprisingly calm. Isaac also noticed his stance, which was different from the others. Kim Jinho's stance was threatening, but at the same time completely calm. After assessing his opponent, Isaac mentally admitted to himself that he was feeling anxious. He was very surprised that he felt fear at the sight of some street kid. The realization of this feeling greatly enraged Isaac because he had never been afraid of anyone, and the very fact of this feeling was humiliating for him. Isaac rushed at Kim Jinho, but as soon as he got too close, he immediately received a strong blow to the chin. The blow was really strong, and the fighter's nose started bleeding. This surprised him greatly because he did not expect that the boy could cause him even the slightest harm. Kim Jinho, remaining in his place and still calm, advised the fighter not to put his fist behind his shoulders. Kim Jinho added that the blow was supposed to be delivered from a defensive stance directly into the opponent's face, and repeated the blow, demonstrating what was said in practice. After this blow, Kim Jinho noted that this was the fastest way and also easy and fast, and repeated the blow again. Each subsequent movement he continued to comment. Putting his leg to the side, he explained that sometimes it was possible to move the center of gravity back to make it easier to hit even harder. After that, he delivered another blow to Isaac, who did not even have time to group himself to defend and block the blow. Isaac very quickly lost his front tooth and developed several very large bruises on his face. The crowd was a little confused by what they saw. People thought that Isaac could give in because it was hard to believe that such a boy was such a professional, and Ryu, on the contrary, barely looked at the ring and simply prayed to all the gods for the life of her friend. Tears welled up in her eyes. She was absolutely sure that he had little chance of standing up to such a strong fighter. She was so scared that she paid little attention to the crowd's noise about the poor man who had beaten the strongest fighter in the village. Kim Jinho could have become the new hero of this place, but his goal was only to make money and nothing more. When Rio opened her eyes, who thought that what was happening in the ring was her imagination. She could not believe that 218, her cellmate, was actually beating such a big guy. Ika's was badly bent by Kim Jinho's strong blows, but he still continued to fight even though he could barely stand on his feet. Everything went blurry before his eyes. The picture doubled. This was very unusual for him. He couldn't believe he was losing. He didn't want to admit such a big shame. With every thought that he was losing to such a puppy, anger and adrenaline rushed over him, and he rushed at Kim Jinho but failed. Ika's was stunned by the fact that he could not dodge the small fists of the boy who caught up with him in any case. Ika's received blow after blow, and this greatly affected his sense of dignity. The fighter tried to gather his strength when he received another blow from the boy, even harder than the previous one. As a result, Ika's fell and was never able to get back on his feet. That was his first defeat. Kim Jinho, seeing that Ika's would not get up again, called the referee and asked him to watch carefully, and asked if he should have played without rules and finished off his opponent. The judge felt very uncomfortable and could not find the words to explain his wrongness. He walked up to Kim Jinho and raised his hand up, declaring him the winner. Kim Jinho thought that everything was over before it even started and he should have put less effort into this fight. After this, he went to count his winnings and was very upset by the injustice he encountered. The odds were 62-1, but he received very little money and assumed that they wanted to cheat him because of his young age, since such a win was beyond even the simplest mathematics. The girl accepting bets and paying out winnings was very scared when she was presented with such a claim and assured that she did not want to blame anyone in any way and paid out the winnings correctly. Kim Jinho continued to insist that he received too little money considering the stakes that were placed. He looked at Ryo and asked how much money she had bet on his winnings. He saw that she was very worried. Kim Jinho was very upset and reminded her that he asked her to bet all the money she had. Ryu tried to explain this by saying that she hated betting so much that she decided that they should have left some money for dinner. A girl appeared out of nowhere with two thugs on her sides and intervened in their argument. She greeted Kim Jinho and laughed at their argument and asked if he had time to talk a little. Kim Jinho managed to notice that during the fight the judge was looking at this girl attentively and demanded that she introduce herself first. The girl smirked at first. I don't think she'll have to give her name. She emphasized that apparently the guy came to this place for the first time and did not know her. She explained that she was the owner of this ring and called herself Jurna. The girl introduced herself and tried to talk to Kim Jinho again. But he turned around abruptly and said that he was not for sale and hurried away, dragging Ryu along with him. Ryo knew this girl and could imagine what kind of request she could make there. But Kim Jinho was unable to escape as Jurna's bodyguards appeared on his way. Kim Jinho was only indignant at their appearance and asked if they also wanted to get punched in the face and asked them to name the number of days they wanted to sleep. The bodyguards were a little surprised by such impudence from the skinny poor man, but they did not step aside, and Kim Jinho was very surprised by their devotion to their mistress. Jurna, without waiting for permission to talk, said that she had found the champion Ikas in a big city and asked if the young man understood what that meant. Jurna noted that she would let the guy go this time, but they would meet again in any case and perhaps talk in a more pleasant environment. Kim Jinho was not very happy about such a new acquaintance. Her manner of behavior irritated him. After the fight and an unpleasant encounter with the ring's mistress, Kim Jinho and Ryu went to the nearest tavern. Ryu, dying of hunger, sprawled out on the table and exhaled, saying that it was better not to joke with the woman who was the mistress of the ring. Ryu noted that it was possible to imagine that the girl was a simple ring owner, but in fact she was an important person in the village whom they would constantly bump into. Kim Jinho responded to this by saying that for him she was just an old fox who loved money, and Ryu agreed with his words with complete confidence. Kim Jinho understood that Jurna simply wanted to profit from him and had no other interest. In the world of real fighting, similar situations had already happened to him, and he knew perfectly well what to expect. As soon as he showed results, hundreds of managers came to him who saw him as just a way to make money, and a bunch of charlatans led him around by the nose. He was just a child who came to the big city for a dream. Meeting his current manager was just a stroke of luck. He was the one who made him a champion and never tried to cheat or set him up. Thanks to his coach, Kim Jinho stopped being a loser who was fooled by everyone and became someone who gradually rose to the top, to the title of champion. Soon the waiter brought a large portion of vertican beef to their table, which Ryo was extremely happy about because she was very hungry. But before the girl started eating, Kim Jinho asked her to take her time and look at the meat more closely. He noted that the meat was fake because the color and marbling were too different from the real thing. Kim Jinho also added that in general the whole serving of vertican sky beef was very strange because it took a whole week to get it in prison, and if the beef could be taken from a nearby village they wouldn't have to wait so long for it. Kim Jinho also remembers that the meat was very valuable and it couldn't be that it was given to all visitors. He assumed that the beef was Waijinsen, which was lower in rank but much less rare. Ryu didn't understand why Zed was so indignant because no matter what kind of beef the belly was, it didn't seem to matter. Zed explained that he was offended to pay for a fake vertican A and decided that they had the right to catch the tavern in such a deception and called the waiter to him. The waiter came up and asked if the boy wanted to pay, noting that the portion had been standing untouched on their table for a very long time. Kim Jinho replied that the meat was fake and reminded that he had ordered vertican beef, after which he demanded that they bring his real order first. The waiter was indignant and asked the boy where he was. I emphasized that this was not some kind of eatery, and when Kim Jinho demanded to call the director, he began to be rude to him. Kim Jinho knew how to deal with such people and said loudly that this was something that should be told to all the visitors, and immediately everyone present turned to their table. The waiter decided that it was not worth drawing so much attention to this situation and agreed to take Kim Jinho and Ryu to the director and invited them to follow him. The director sat exactly like a king on a throne, and seeing the indignant boy asked if he was that scandalous guest. Kim Jinsu replied that the director was the same and also sold counterfeit goods, but he only laughed at this. The director advised that the boys should learn to read the atmosphere of the establishment in which he was located. Kim Jinho replied that it was unclear how things were with the atmosphere, but it was the director who couldn't read the situation and asked who wanted to be killed first. The director became very angry when he heard such words addressed to him and shouted that he should be taught life and gave orders to his people. The tavern director's guards immediately rushed at the boy but were quickly rebuffed. The guards rushed at Kim Jinho one after another, but each one was defeated. Just like in the ring, Kim Jinho was very fast and moved confidently, quickly knocking out the guards. From the outside it seemed that for him this fight was nothing and he had no strength. Despite the fact that all his opponents were very tall and large, this did not stop him from successfully hitting their faces and twisting their arms. Also ignoring the different weight categories, Kim Jinho easily threw the tavern director's bodyguards over his shoulder. The director was filled with admiration at this carnage, and he watched what was happening with pleasure. But when he realized that the boy had easily dealt with all of his bodyguards, fear overtook him. It seemed to him that the boy was just showing off, but when he saw that his entire guard was lying unconscious on the floor, he got seriously scared. Ryu stood a little behind and asked if the director even knew who was standing in front of him, and said that this boy had defeated Ika's. The tavern manager thought about how he had heard a story about a street kid defeating the best fighter, but he doubted that it was true. Having thought about this, the manager asked Kim Jinho what he wanted. The young man indicated that he would like appropriate compensation within reasonable limits. He then explained that the first condition was to return the money they had spent, and the second was that the director himself had to pay for all the food they had eaten in this tavern at the price of vertican beef. The tavern director was not very pleased with these demands and became angry at the impudence shown towards him. However, the director had no choice and agreed to all the conditions set for him. Rio was delighted when she lay down on a very soft, clean bed in pleasant conditions. Stretching out across the entire length of the bed, she said that it was the first time in her life that she had slept on such a soft bed, and she really liked it. Afterwards, she turned on her side and looked at Zed Kim Jinho's character, and noted that he was indeed an aristocrat. Zed, settling more comfortably in bed, smiled and assured that if the rumors spread, then this restaurant would be finished, and for those who did not have a return coin, the negotiations were pure hell. Ryu laughed and noted that it was the first time she had seen someone with such a red face as the director had. After which the girl thanked Zed for everything he had done, and they went to bed. It was already deep and quiet outside when Ryu woke up. She tried for a long time to fall back asleep, but she couldn't, although Zed on the contrary slept very soundly. Still, she decided that it was no longer worth trying to sleep. She sat up in bed and tried to wake Zed, quietly calling his name. He didn't answer her for a long time, but she continued to call him. Having made sure that he wouldn't wake up, the girl got up, put on a scarf, and headed towards the exit of the room. She walked very quietly to the doors and tried to open them without the slightest creak. But in fact, Zed was not sleeping and heard everything and wanted to see what would happen next. This went on for several days, but Rio always returned by morning. The next morning, when the girl returned, she discovered that Zed was no longer sleeping. She sat down on the bed and asked when they would eat, complaining of severe hunger, and noted that all he did was constantly exercise. She was surprised because magic was hated more than sport, and she asked if he trained because he had no mana. Zed wiped the sweat off his face and replied that the reason was very similar, which made the girl even more surprised. Kim Jinho looked at his stats and was very angry because they still weren't increasing. No matter how much he checked, nothing changed, and he already had the feeling that he was under a curse. Well, I'll throw all these bad thoughts away. He finished his exercises and invited Ryu to breakfast. Ryu suggested that they would have potato salad or chicken stew, but Zed replied with a smile that they would have beef. Hearing this, Ryu was very happy because she was delighted with this dish. They hadn't been to a meat restaurant for 3 days, and the reason was that they needed to avoid another fight with someone, and besides, on the first day they ate 10 portions because they had a lot of money. On the way to the restaurant, Zed asked the girl how many gold coins they had left, and she replied that there was almost no money left because the prices in the village were not bad. Kim Jinho thought about how he had been playing this game for 10 years, so he knew all the prices very well. and in order to spend 50 coins in 3 days, he had to throw them around in all directions. Jinho decided that Ryu really thought that he was an aristocrat and therefore did not know anything about money. He thought that the girl was definitely hiding something or was simply greedy. He decided to pretend that he didn't notice how she was embezzling money until she gave off a sense of betrayal, but he understood that this couldn't go on forever, although it was worth finding out the reason. As soon as Zed and Ryu arrived at the meat restaurant, one of the guards immediately ran to the director to report their arrival. The owner of the restaurant was named Janf. His pride was stronger than iron plates, and it suffered because of some small guy. The director prepared for their arrival and made sure that his people did everything as he ordered. In the hall, a large chair was set for Zed and Ryu, to which they were immediately brought. The waiter noted that they had prepared plenty of meat for them and they could eat without thinking about anything. The waiter also noted that they could not call him if they needed anything, and this politeness made Jinho very wary. He thought that there were no murderers among the workers, but inside everything was the same as last time. Jinho was sure that the director was up to something. Ryo immediately began to devour everything with barely enough force to eat, and was surprised that her friend did not touch the food at all. She handed him the salad and, noting that it was special, asked him to eat it all at once. He thanked her well. He was still very wary. He decided to just observe the situation, decided that time would show what the director had planned. But before he took a bite of the salad, a thought immediately came to his head, and he shouted at Ryu to spit out everything she had eaten. It dawned on him that the meat was inedible and could be poisoned. Ryu, hearing this dinner, began to spit out all the food she had managed to eat and even tried to empty her stomach. She was worried that she might die now if there was poison in the food, but Jinho tried to calm her down by saying that nothing would happen from such a small amount. He suspected that the workers were planning something against them. Congratulating the meat was a very mean act. If he didn't have a feature that resisted poison, they could have simply been killed, and he still hadn't tried in vain to acquire it, although Ryu didn't understand why he was so sure that the food was poisoned since it had no aftertaste. Ryu noted that the elite knew them when something was wrong and asked what they should do now if they were about to be killed. She thought that they should run away, but Jinho saw no need for that. When the girl asked why, he replied that the workers should also pay for this, and even more than necessary. Soon the director, who was called by Jinho, entered the hall. He indignantly declared that they should sit and eat their food since they came and should not have called the owner. Jinho was sitting at the table and the plates in front of him were already empty. He said that he wanted to clear up a misunderstanding and ask something. The director immediately noticed this and thought that such a quantity of frog poison was about to have consequences. He was indignant that there should be a misunderstanding because they were bandits who took his money by blackmail. Jinho was completely calm and replied that the director did not understand them at all. She asked him to sit down and talk over a piece of meat. Ryu immediately handed him one of the pieces with a completely innocent smile. The director waved it off with indignation that they were shoving it right into his mouth, and Jinho responded that if the director listened to them, they would release me from the previous conditions. The director continued to complain, saying that they had nothing to talk about. Jinho thought it was strange that the owner continued to give them money and asked if there was a reason why he didn't want to eat. Without waiting for an answer, Jinho directly stated his assumption that the meat was poisoned and looked at the tavern owner with particular malice. The director immediately tried to refute this assumption, calling it nonsense, but it was clear from his face that he was lying. Jinho noted that the director was too surprised that he was found out. After this, the young man easily, with just one hand, threw over the entire table, separating them from each other. The tavern owner became very tense and demanded an explanation for this behavior. But then his gaze fell on the floor where all the meat that had been cooked lay. He couldn't believe that these children actually figured out about the poison and just threw out all the food. Jinho sat down on a bench and explained that they felt sorry for the director and did not come to his restaurant, but he turned out to be such a scoundrel and dared to poison the meat. The owner decided not to show it. I think they couldn't guess about it, and started shouting that there was no poison in the meat and demanded at least some proof. Jinho smirked again and took off his lenses, stating that the evidence was very good. He drew the director's attention to his eyes, and he immediately realized that an Erichan stood in front of him. Jinho said that since the owner dared to deceive the Erichan, the price for this would be his life, because if he alone disappeared, no one would even notice. The director was seriously scared and turned pale from the horror that came over him. He was so frightened that he immediately fell to his knees and began to beg for forgiveness. He tried to defend himself by saying that he did not recognize Rohan and otherwise would never have gone against him. Asking for mercy, the director could not understand how the Archon from the west ended up on the southern outskirts and why she did not immediately make herself known. He also did not understand why the Archon was dressed in rags, but he could not find answers to these questions. Zed, looking at his crocodile tears, fully realized how powerful the Archon family was. It was a really strong trump card, and it was worth using sometimes. Zed replied that if the director agreed to do everything, then he would be spared once, and he would immediately be thanked and bowed for such generosity. Zed demanded that he never reveal his identity to anyone, and that he give up half of his property, and only in that case would he be able to forgive him. Janf was sincerely touched by the generosity of the Archon because it was better to be penniless than dead. Besides, the boy asked for only half. He hurried to bring everything before the Archon changed his mind. After the loyal owner hurried to carry out his order, Zed put his blue lenses back on. Ryu praised him for the fact that the director had managed to swell so much that he couldn't even squeak. Zed wanted to leave this village immediately after receiving the money, but Jirna appeared on his way again. They met in the same tavern before they even had time to go outside. She was with her bodyguard again and was surprised that Zed was leaving this settlement so quickly. The girl laughed and noted that he was a much greater man than she thought. Zed, looking at her, wondered whether she knew that he was an Archon or was talking about something completely different. He looked at the tavern manager who was rushing back and forth and assumed that he could have revealed his identity and in such a short time. And he probably wasn't as scared as he seemed. If it wasn't the director who told this, then there was only one place where the girl could have found out about him. And he was afraid that if she told the director that he had only one last name from his family, then he wouldn't get the money. He invited her to talk in private and they went to a remote table. Zed demanded the girl explain why she came and what she wanted from him. Jirna smiled and noted that the young man seemed not to understand her and that she actually had one business with him, although she came to the tavern to meet her client. Zed also guessed that it was Ryu, and as soon as he called her name, the girl confessed and regretted that she did not tell everything at once. Jirna turned to the girl and said that she had found out everything that she had been asked about, but for this she would have to pay more than had been agreed upon. The girl began to complain that they had not agreed on this and noted that she had already paid too much, but Jirna said that this money was not enough for her even for a day, and that searching for a missing relative was not so cheap. The girl was ready to cry from the injustice of this woman. She said that this search was her last hope, and Zed finally understood what the matter might be. He intervened in the conversation and suggested linking the matter that Jirna had with him with Ryu's request and the payment problem that had arisen. Jirna was surprised that the young man offered to do business with her in exchange for helping the girl, but she easily agreed, demanding that Zed fight Ikas again. Ryu wanted to immediately dissuade him by pointing out that it could have been a trap, but he didn't listen to her at all and agreed to a second fight in exchange for the woman continuing Ryu's assignment. Jirna licked her lips and promised that she would fulfill this request because she always kept her promises. After this conversation, they received money from the tavern manager and hurried away. Ryu carried a chest of money, but she was very sad and did not utter a single word the entire way. Zed asked why she was so sad if they had made so much money, but the girl remained silent for a long time and did not even answer this question. After thinking for a bit, the girl asked for forgiveness, noting that she did not want to deceive anyone and generally understood that it was stupid, but also explained that she had no other choice. Zed calmly replied that he knew about everything, even that she took the money, after which he added that he knew about everything except that she had turned specifically to Jirna, and the girl was surprised why he had always pretended that he didn't know. He didn't even look at her and replied that he simply didn't feel sorry for any money, and therefore he decided that it wasn't worth raising this topic. He explained that this was equivalent to the help that the girl had given him personally, and it would be wrong to demand anything from her. But Zed also asked her not to repeat such machinations again, and not to hide anything from him, because the most vile thing that could be done was to undermine someone else's trust. He pointed out to her that no matter where the girl came from, she should not have become trash, and she, burning with shame, swore that she would never do such a thing again. They continued on their way, but the girl suddenly stopped and called Zed by name. She asked him not to go to the second fight and suggested that they simply run away with the money as they had wanted earlier. Zed asked what would happen to the girl's lost relatives, and she replied that Zed himself should have understood that that woman would not back down again. Ryu was not so stupid as to fall for Jirna's tricks a second time, although she was so desperate that she turned to her herself. Ryu grabbed the already torn rope, which she clearly saw with her own eyes. Jirna took advantage of the desperate girl without the slightest twinge of conscience. Zed thought for a bit and replied that he knew what Jirna might be thinking, and at first wanted to run away himself but later changed his mind. The girl replied that she was confident in his skills but emphasized that the woman was definitely up to something. After thinking a little more, Zed replied that this was exactly why he wanted this fight, and even more so because looking at the trash he always wanted to clean it up. Besides, it was incredibly pleasant for him to defeat the opponent he put all his effort into it. At that time the Carry One colony was quite hectic. The escape of prisoners raised the whole prison on its ears. The guards and wardens were running all over the prison carrying out the general's orders. They were preparing to catch the escapees. Soon all the work was done, and one of the guards came to report to General Clark that everything was ready for capture, and he sent the first group on their way. General Clark knew that the escaped rats were hiding right under his nose, and it wouldn't be difficult for him to get them back. He was sure that next time he would definitely succeed in finishing off the boy. He had no doubt that his strength would be enough to suppress Zed Arahan and then painfully finish him off. 3 days later, Zed went to the ring to fight the local champion ICAs again at the request of the owner of that very ring. When he saw ICAs, you were very surprised why he was still alive, because he had beaten him so badly that his completely healthy appearance aroused great suspicion. Ryu walked closer to the ring and asked Zed if they could call off the fight if he felt in danger, but it was too late to refuse. The judge announced the start of the revenge fight between Ikas and the homeless man. The crowd was shocked right from the start when the opponents had just taken up their positions. Ryu couldn't take her eyes off Ikas, understanding how prepared he was for this fight. The local champion stood in the same position as Zed the first time. ICAs completely repeated his technique. It was clear that Jirna had given him some parting words and maybe even said that Zed was an Erichan without mana. Zed thought that it could very well be true that Ikas had been thrown into a concentration camp and decided that it was worth checking. He decided to thrust his fist straight from the chest, applying maximum effort, and watched the reaction of his opponent. ICAs looked very animated and overly pleased. This time he was even more confident of his victory than last time. Ikas himself admitted while attacking that he had trained a lot and these techniques had proven to be very effective. Although in reality he still couldn't hit Zed. Dodging the village champion's attacks, Zed noted that he had indeed been training, and was even a little surprised. But then his gaze fell on Ikas's belt, and when he was not expecting it, Zed dealt him several strong blows. After which Zed attacked again, and this time aimed at his opponent's head and hit the target accurately. Ikas was able to stay on his feet and held on with more dignity than in the first fight, and a second after receiving the blow he was ready to continue the fight. He jumped to the side and smiling broadly said that everything he had not heard was true. Ikas said that he knew that his opponent had no mana at all. Zed was not very pleased that this information became known to anyone other than himself. Someone from the audience wondered out loud, since when did Ikas become so strong? Someone else reminded that he was actually the strongest fighter. The crowd immediately picked up and began to shout loudly that Ikas would be able to win. Zed ignored the shouts from the crowd and focused only on his opponent's belt, certain that it was an ogre's belt. It was an artifact that increased physical damage by 90%, and since Zed's magic stat was at 0, it was the worst weapon against him. Ryu also noticed that something was clearly wrong with the local champion. This time he seemed much stronger and was taking so much of Zed's hits. The girl ran up to the Zed and shouted to him that Jirna had definitely done something and that was why the fight was too dangerous. But Zed smiled and asked her not to worry, assuring her that everything was fine. Ryu understood this calmness and his smile confused her. She was even more worried than last time, and now, even knowing what her friend was capable of, she doubted that he would be able to withstand. After some time, Ikas asked if Zed wanted to surrender, but then he confidently refused. Trying to choose the right moment to attack, Zed told his opponent that he was truly surprised. Ikas watched him and was a little embarrassed seeing a completely different stance. Zed's pose changed beyond recognition, and Ikas had not even studied this, but the young man continued to smile and said that he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, and he had no reason to give up. Ikasa was confused by this stance, and he did not understand whether he should have become the same because he had not discussed this with Jirna. That was his biggest mistake. Zed charged at him and landed some hard kicks right to his head. Such blows not only clouded the champion's vision but also damaged his mind. This blow was followed by another one in the waist area. This blow was also very strong and was delivered with the foot. The strongest man on earth, Jinho, was incredibly happy at that very moment. No one could stand against him for more than a minute. Because of this, he was unable to test the techniques he had been perfecting for so long. And his new opponent was incredibly strong, and although he was covered in blood, he continued to hold on, which made Jinho very happy. Zed, or Jinho, had never seen anything like this before, and his eyes were shining with delight. He was just glad that he agreed to this test and continued to attack his opponent. Ikaz tried every time to predict what technique the homeless man would use and what kind of blow he would attack with. But each time he couldn't figure it out and missed blow after blow which were aimed at the head. Zed did not calm down because this opponent gave him the opportunity to fully indulge and test all the techniques he knew. Ikaz was barely holding on. With each subsequent blow, it was becoming more and more difficult for him to return to the fight. He couldn't even try to attack himself, and soon Zed dealt the finishing blow. Falling to the ground, Ikaz cursed this fight, realizing that he couldn't even predict his opponent's blows, let alone block them. Zed, observing the condition of his opponent, shouted at him, forbidding him to fall, and suggested that he felt good and was not in pain. Ikaz understood that he could not withstand another blow and tried to stop Zed and shouted that he surrendered. But his scream was interrupted by another kick to the jaw. In general, this was the end of the fight because Ikaz would not be able to get up again. Ryu, who had no faith in her friend's victory, was shocked by the results of this fight. She watched as Zed finished off the champion Ikaz and realized how much she had underestimated him. The last blow that Zed dealt caused Ikaz's champion belt to break in half. Ikaz wheezed from the pain in his stomach, and it seemed like he was about to fall. Ikaz dropped to one knee and tried to muster all the strength in himself to rise to his feet, but instead he seemed to freeze in place. This left Zed confused. He didn't want what he thought to be true. He looked at Ikaz with wide eyes and hoped that he would still get up and they would continue the fight. Ikaz looked at Zed with incredible anger and mentally cursed him in every possible way. As a result, the champion Ikaz loudly shouted that he had lost and no longer had the belt. He called the referee and asked him to stop the fight. But instead of stopping the fight, he received another kick right in the face. Zed approached him and smilingly said that Ikasu should not have given up because he had not yet received complete satisfaction. Zed added that it would be very annoying for him to end this fight like this, and Ikaz already looked at his opponent with fear, wanting to just run away from the ring. Ikaz saw how Zed's eyes acquired two colors at once, which made them look even more terrifying. Zed noticed the way the champion was looking at him and realized that something was wrong. The champion's pupils narrowed, and he stuttered as he tried to say out loud who his opponent really was. When he said the name of the Arahan family, your eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness. Zed was very upset by this. He did not expect that his opponent would give up so quickly. Inside, he felt a very strange sensation that had never visited him before. He felt as if worms were crawling all over his body. He immediately opened his profile to understand what was really happening to him. And when he saw that he finally gained 1 point of magic, he was incredibly happy. It was like he was being flooded with endorphins, and it was even better than he expected. He knew that the mage couldn't have magic at all, and he figured that there was nothing wrong with him using a trick. After these reflections, he discovered that there was complete silence in the hall, and this confused him greatly. He turned to the crowd who were staring at him. Everyone in the room seemed frozen in place and looking only at him. Ryu was already running to him and trying to find out why he took off his lenses, but Zed didn't understand what the girl was talking about, because he was sure that he hadn't touched them. Well, he finally realized what she was talking about, and he asked if his eyes were red, although he didn't feel the lenses fall out and assumed that they could have simply melted due to mana. Ryu noted that the color of his eyes seemed to have become more saturated, although perhaps she had simply seen him without lenses for a long time. All the spectators also understood who was in front of them, and someone even tried to say it out loud. After someone shouted the name of the Arahan family, all the people started to bustle about. They tried to run away as quickly as possible, because they believed that if someone crossed Arahan's eyes, they would certainly die. Zed swore, realizing that things were bad, and that they could easily send guards after them, and he himself started running. Finally, Zed shouted to Jinho to look for Ryu's relatives. They would definitely meet again. Jinho was extremely unhappy with what happened in the end and thought that I probably should have listened to the general and not acted on my own. Jinho was very angry and was intent on tearing Zed Arahan to shreds. Jinho thought about how much she had lost because Ikaz was a high-class wrestler and brought in huge amounts of money, and in 3 years he received 600 gold. But now the champion has lost his marketability, and she only gave 200 gold pieces for the ogre's belt. She also paid General Clark 1,200 gold pieces, and this was a huge loss for her. Her damage was 2,000 gold, and it was incredibly difficult to get it back under the current conditions. She didn't know what to do and was incredibly angry. She screamed and swore at everything she saw. She also scolded herself for not listening to General Clark right away and losing a lot of money. But most of all, she was angry at Zed Arahan, who did not live up to her expectations. She was ready to simply tear him apart. Zed and Ryu quickly ran in after the fight to get the lenses and money, but when they came out, the village was already full of guards. They had to hide carefully and be very careful because they couldn't allow themselves to be captured. They decided to hide in the same alley in which they hid as soon as they arrived in this village. They climbed into the same barrels, and only after waiting for complete silence did they decide to look around. Ryo jumped out of the barrel and asked Zed to wait, promising that she would try to find the cart. But before she left, a young guy dived into the alley and explained that he had been sent by Mrs. Jinho, who asked him to take them to her. Moreover, the young man added that no one would give them a cart anyway because the people were incredibly scared. But despite the circumstances, Zed and Ryu followed this guy and got into the cart. Zed was sure that this was another trap and everyone was gathered somewhere in a remote place and waiting for them. Ryu didn't understand why they got into that cart in that case, to which Zed replied that they would have to solve that problem anyway. As Zed thought, they were taken away from the village where the prison guards led by General Clark, as well as Mrs. Jinho herself, had gathered. General Clark only smirked when Zed and Ryu came into his field of vision, although deep down he was incredibly happy that he had another chance to get revenge. Ryu was trembling with fear, understanding what they would have to do now. I was convinced that death would definitely await them. General Clark began to make the accusation. He recalled that they dared to steal the keys and run away, and that only rats did that, not magicians. Mrs. Jinho only laughed meanly behind his back. She smiled and didn't say that if they had cooperated with her from the very beginning, nothing bad would have happened. Zed was still calm and replied that even if it were possible to rewind time, he would not have acted differently, and noted that they still could not kill him. Hearing this, General Clark became furious and shouted that he wanted to finish him off immediately, ordering his men not to interfere. Zed asked Ryu to also move as far away as possible and not get caught, and although she was incredibly scared for him, she was not going to get underfoot. General Clark was surprised that the young man was actually going to fight him, and noted that he was braver than the average mage. Zed replied that his chances of winning were 50%, and he knew that this was the purest truth. When going up against a strong opponent, he knew that he shouldn't humiliate himself, but when going up against a weak one, he had to be careless. He thought that even though the general was a knight of the fifth circle, he still shouldn't be afraid of 50-50 chances. General Clark raised his sword and noted that Arahan was still impudent and warned that he would immediately release all the energy. The general did so. He released all the energy that was seething inside him and even hoped a little that he would be able to defeat the boy on the first try. Zed remained in his place and bided his time. Beginning, he wanted to observe his opponent and then take any action. The general decided to act and immediately rushed into the attack. He couldn't wait for the moment when he would emerge victorious from this battle and be able to feel at peace. Zed didn't move and waited for General Clark to get close enough. I watch as the general flies straight towards him. He thought that this was exactly what he wanted and that he didn't really need that much. He just wanted to feel those long-forgotten feelings, and at that moment in the fight with General Clark, he became a fighter again. His natural-born fighter trait was applied and all stats were temporarily increased by 10. His lenses melted again, revealing bright red eyes. Zed and General Clark joined forces in a great fight between two very strong opponents. The energy around was so strong that it was very difficult to withstand. Ryu barely held on and tried to hide as best she could. She was very worried about her friend. Unfortunately, she couldn't help him in any way. Besides, she didn't even see him because of the general's dense, strong energy. General Clark had no intention of retreating. He stood firm and dreamed of the moment when he would kill the Arahan. But when everything became clear to him, he no longer saw Zed. He simply disappeared right in front of his nose, and the ground where he was opened up into a huge crack. Zed shouted, called the general, and pointed out that he was up there. The general was slightly confused by what he saw in front of him. His eyes were immediately struck by the incredible glow that emanated from his opponent. Zed had a thunderous aura with lightning flashing all around him and his eyes glowing bright red. Zed Archon had acquired his final form, but General Clark could not understand how he had done it. Until the very end, he did not believe in his strength and capabilities and thought that the boy could resist him only thanks to some unjustified luck. But now that Zed appeared before him in all his power, he had nothing to say. He was shocked and simply froze in place. Zed didn't waste any time and immediately struck General Clark. Lightning erupted all around again. The general blocked this blow with his sword, but it was obvious how much difficulty he had in doing so. He slid backwards on the ground, unable to withstand the onslaught of the magician. Zed bounced off the general, pushing him far enough away from himself and descending lower to the ground. General Clark shouted that it was impossible and that the boy could not have a thunder aura. Thunder aura was a special energy that ignored the basic 4 elements such as water, air, earth, and fire. All the magicians admired her, and it was the energy that even the founder of the legendary Arahan family could not master, but Zed was able to master the legendary power. The prison guards and wardens stepped back, seeing what the boy they had been following had become. Jirna now understood where she had been unlucky enough to get into and could imagine what kind of power this young man possessed. Ryu looked at her friend with great delight. She finally felt relief and some peace for his life. She even dared to come out of her hiding place to get a better look at what was happening on the battlefield. Zed thought that this was the very power of his blood, and something that had been inaccessible to him for a long time. General Clark said that he despised most of all those who relied only on the strength of their genes, still not recognizing the great power of the Arahan. But for him it was a huge mistake for which he had to pay. Zed attacked again, and the whole space was struck by lightning again. Zed was getting closer and closer to General Clark, and it was already very difficult for him to resist this energy. There was a slight smile on Zed's face, and in his eyes it was clear that he could not be defeated and also could not be doubted. He gathered all my anger and resentment and moved towards General Clark, leading the force of thunderous aura behind him. General Clark was still confident that he would be able to repel the attacks of this magician, and having delivered his blow, he was sure that Zed would not be able to dodge his sword. But when his sword came into contact with the thunder aura, the general found that the attack did not bring the expected results. It was a shield that did not let through any attack from the general and did not allow even minimal damage to be inflicted on Zed Arahan. This was a great surprise to General Clark, and while he was dumbfounded by this, Zed attacked him himself. The lightning strike hit the general straight in the stomach and crushed his 5th circle night power. The general screamed loudly from the pain piercing his entire body, and then his facial expression froze. In Zed's eyes he saw all his strength as well as hatred and revenge. He could not beg for mercy even if the general's pride allowed it. It was a powerful confrontation of energies that no one had ever seen before. Zed Arahan and General Clark were close to each other, and one was bound to fall at the hands of the other. General Clark prepared to attack one more time, although at that moment he already understood that his strength was not enough to break through the magician's shield. Zed dropped to the ground, immediately getting into the right stance. Not even a split second had passed before he counterattacked General Clark with his fist. General Clark felt pain and wondered why the young man who seemed to be a magician was punching white people with his fists. The magicians used their power to prevent the knights from breaking through to them, and the knights tried to resist magic and attacked using a lot of their power. This is a historically established rule of the world that no one has broken before. But that was far in history until Zed Arahan awakened his power. After this power was awakened, the rules had to be rewritten. I can't go out with Zed Arahan as I can with other magicians. It was necessary to move away further in order to use less force against any knight who wanted to attack him. Although even in this case it was difficult to break through this magician's strong shield. General Clark used every ability and technique he had to get to Arahan, but he was not getting the results he expected. Zed Arahan simply didn't leave him any room to use good moves. The general was failing, although he did not want to admit it to himself until the very end. Zed understood that the general's defeat was only a matter of time and continued to press him. He continued to punch him in his weakest spots and suck the life force out of him. Arahan used his strength to the maximum and delivered another blow that sent General Clark flying back. Blood gushed from General Clark's mouth and nose. He was no longer capable of fighting. His men rushed to his aid but suddenly froze in fear when they saw the state he was in. The general was filled with anger. He did not want to admit his defeat. His dignity could not allow it. When Arahan approached him, the general only laughed loudly at the sight of him and said that the Arahans were indeed an amazing family. Then he admitted that he had lost and asked Zed to kill him. Zed was in no hurry to deliver the final blow and asked if General Clark wanted to know why he lost. But he replied that he didn't want to hear about it and would just like to die. But Zed decided otherwise and explained that there was only one reason for his loss. The reason was that Zed tried and prepared more than General Clark. But General Clark was more indignant at this than pleased to learn why he had failed. He shouted with all his might at the magician to stop talking nonsense and pointed out that it was all because he was from the Arahan family and was different from birth. He grabbed his sword tightly, saying that the magician had no business knowing what ordinary people were going through when their lives were ruined by people like him. Arahan, however, did not remain silent for long, and then said that he was weaker than the general at the moment and that if he had used all his accumulated experience he would have definitely won. Arahan noted that feelings of inferiority clouded the General Rabbit's eyes, so he was stuck in one place and he shouldn't look for the reason for his defeat somewhere else. Zed said that this reason was hidden only in himself. The general listened to this with his head down and waited for the magician to finish. After the magician finished, the general only said that it was funny to think that the young magician reminded him of his long-forgotten knightly spirit. General Clark did not want any more of this talk and demanded that it be stopped and that he finally be helped to face death. Zed thought that it was dangerous because if he killed a person in this place, he would be put on the wanted list throughout the empire. And he couldn't just leave the general like that. At that moment, his natural-born fighter feature and ultimate form skill were switched off. Zed looked at his hands. The lightning on them was quickly fading. There were shouts from behind him. Jinho was shouting at the general's guards, scolding them for simply standing and watching. She ordered the general's men to go and kill the mage, but they were definitely not happy with such an order because they saw with their own eyes what he was capable of. Zed, without turning around, thought that such a number of guards was very dangerous and did not move from his place. Suddenly Zed felt a light wind that was not there and which was getting stronger very quickly. The guards did not move. No one understood where such a sudden strong wind came from, and people did not dare to engage in battle in such circumstances. Arakan immediately realized with the appearance of the wind that it was someone's magic. I quickly guessed that there was definitely a magician nearby. He also understood that his affairs were also bad just like everyone else's, but he could not even guess where their enemy was. Just as abruptly as it had started, the wind began to stop. Doubts that it was someone's magic disappeared. Well, what the Arachan saw shocked him. Everything changed in a few seconds until a strong wind raised all the dust and leaves and obstructed the view. When the wind died down, Arahan discovered that all of the general's guards and the general himself were already dead. Their bodies were cut up. Jinho was also dead. Everyone had died not long ago, and Arahan could not explain it except that someone could help him. Although he himself strongly doubted this theory because he would have to take all the blame for it on himself. He started calling Ryu. He was worried and sincerely hoped that she was okay. He called her and looked at the place where she was hiding, but she did not respond to his cries for a very long time. But the girl suddenly appeared from behind the bushes. Her face was twisted from the horror she was experiencing. She responded with a trembling voice but did not dare to come out of hiding. When she was sure that everything was okay, she came out of hiding and was shocked even more when she saw what was happening. She thought that it was Zed's doing, but he explained that there must have been a powerful mage nearby. But it didn't matter at all since they needed to get out of that place as soon as possible, but Ryu asked them not to rush seeing something. She picked up a blank card from the ground as if it had not just been dropped, which was very strange considering all the other circumstances. Ryu and Zed knew there might be danger nearby, but they didn't suspect that someone was watching them from the tree. The man who was watching them did not want to show himself and waited until they left. Zed and Ryu moved as far as possible from the place where the terrible massacre took place and making sure that they were safe lit a fire. Zed sat near the fire and looked at the map that Ryu had found, wondering what it could be. This map was completely blank. There were no inscriptions, symbols, or drawings on it. It occurred to him that perhaps it would be worth using a little mana to solve this puzzle. When he used magic, a black flame symbol appeared on the card which belonged to the Arahan family. It was used to exchange data for local secret organizations. The Black Mirror Warriors of the Ericon were loyal only to the Ericon family, and their numbers and work were absolutely secret. It was the largest organization in the Empire. On the back of the card was the number 4. Zed tried to remember that number 1 meant acceptance and support, 2 meant rejection or denial, 3 meant a deal or offer, and the number 4 meant watching or protecting. Zed was surprised that the Arachns were protecting him and thought that apparently when he had no magic they threw him out, and now that he had it they were willing to accept him. This reminded him that he should have checked his magic stat since he hadn't known its strength since awakening. After the battle with Clark, some of the penalties were removed and magic increased by 2 points. From this, Jinho concluded that in the game world he entered, experience was gained in the same way as in the game. The acquired skill final form greatly increased physical strength and the spreading shield. But when Jinho checked it, the skill was already disabled and decided that the problem was in the lack of stats, and it turned out that in order to activate it 5 magic points were needed, or 9. While he was thinking about this, Ryu, who could not sleep, approached him. She asked him what they should do now, to which he hesitantly replied that they should go into the ice, thinking that she had gotten lost there. The girl reminded him that he himself had said that Cucker's body was not there, and that rumors would have started to spread, and then they would be put on the wanted list throughout the Empire, and without a carriage they would not have been able to get there. To this, Zed replied that they should also change the route to Tamaya a little. Meanwhile, in the southern frontline outpost of Tami village, no one wasted any time. Magic was cast on a specific location. The young man was walking in that direction on his noble horse. He looked like a knight and slowly walked away from the outpost. He was followed by other riders. This group set out to search at night, not wanting to waste a minute of time. This rider on a noble horse was Teros Bahal, and was going in search of the dishonorable Arahan to punish him. Teros Bahal wore a belt with a large symbolic plaque on it. The first thing he did was go to his master and, kneeling before him, explained that he had summoned him. His master sat on the throne, and next to him was his devoted servant. The gentleman agreed that he had called and noted that business had arisen for him. He said that several years ago one Arachon was exiled to Carrion, and recently he escaped from there after killing several guards and residents of the nearest city. The master entrusted everything to Torres as the heir of the Bahals, who had to manage everything himself and protect the honor of his family. Teros Bahal swore on his life that he would fulfill the master's order and went in search of this Arahan. Zed and Ryu slowly made their way. Ryu kept saying that no matter how you look at the situation that had happened, it was crazy. Zed was already starting to get indignant that the girl was only talking about this, and it was worth keeping quiet. But Ryu did not stop noting that only idiots like them could go straight through the frontline zone. On the outskirts of the Empire there were front lines to protect against the devilish monsters. Each family was responsible for a certain area, and the southern territory belonged to the Bahals. The place they were going to was called Tamaya. This village was on the front lines, so monsters often passed through it, and Zed and Ryu were heading there. They were headed to that place because there was a transfer gate there. It was so expensive that not every rich family could afford to use it, but Zed and Ryu had a lot of money. Ryu said that only when Zed was torn apart by the monster would he be able to understand everything, but he reminded her that they had no other option. As night fell, they stopped and lit a fire somewhere in a secluded place to warm up and spend the night. Ryu took a piece of beef out of her bag and handed it to Zed. "I advise you to eat as much as possible because it was unknown when death would overtake them." Zed heard something from this inhalation and listened to the sounds from the side. The noise he heard was not just the sounds of the nature surrounding them, but something else. Zed put out the fire with one movement and warned the girl that something was approaching them, and Ryu did not miss the chance to emphasize that this is what she was talking about. They hid in the bushes and began to wait for the creature that was hiding somewhere in the forest. Ryu was afraid that it might be a monster, but Zed repeated that meeting the monster was the best thing for them. Zed emphasized to himself that there was not one or two, but at least a couple dozen monsters, and the Bahals would never have let so many through to the southern front line. Just as he was thinking about this, several horsemen appeared from the forest. Zed immediately noticed the white horse with blue eyes that he had heard about many times and even seen playing the game in the real world. He learned that it was a squad of Bahals. Watching them, it was possible to assume that the squad consisted of at least 50 people. Zed prayed that the squad would simply pass by. Soon the squad approached the place where Zed and Ryu had set up camp. they were immediately interested. One of the riders informed his commander that they had found the remains of the camp, and Zed, hearing this, cursed mentally. The knightly order could only be entered from the 5th circle. In other words, there were about 50 Clarks in the squad. Zed understood that if they hid they could be discovered and it was dangerous to run. Ryu, trembling with fear, advised him to run because if he was discovered he would be killed immediately, but they might not touch her. Zed pointed out that the girl herself was shaking with fear and was pretending to be the bravest in vain. Zed told her not to worry, but he never abandoned his own "I promise that they will be together until the end." The detachment arrived at the place where the camp was set up and began to search everything around. Suddenly, in the darkness of the forest, they saw 2 fiery eyes. Their owner turned to them and excitedly asked why they had been looking for only 2 people for so long. Zed came out of the forest with a smile and immediately said his name. He decided to check because even if he sat quietly he would still be killed, and in general it was worth trying to do something. Zed wanted to say that she wanted to talk to the main squad, but as soon as they saw him they immediately attacked. The knight quickly swung his sword trying to strike Zed, who, noting the speed of his opponent, thought that he had misjudged it. But Zed continued to try to negotiate with this knight so that he would be taken to the main detachment, although he did not calm down. Zed was very irritated by this situation, and he realized that it would be impossible to reach an agreement without entering into battle. Zed decided not to waste time and accepted the developing situation to the end. He used his barrier shield to block the blows of his persistent and not very talkative opponent. But to Zed's surprise the knight stopped attacking. But after looking closely Zed realized that the knight did not stop on his own but was stopped by force. The knight had long been commanded to return. This command was not spoken out loud, it was felt by his whole body. As soon as the knight received this order, he immediately disappeared, abandoning the fight with his target. But from the other side of the forest other knights burst out, immediately demanding that Zed introduce himself. Zed was a little taken aback. He knew he was being followed from somewhere, but he didn't know they were so close. He had a perception status of 100 points, but even he did not sense the presence of so many knights. The black flames of the Arikans appeared right after. They surrounded the Knights of the Bahal and ordered them to return from where they came. The man who had previously followed Zed gave his request and promised that in that case the knight would not be harmed and they would remain alive. The last one to come out of the forest was Torres. He ran out with a sword in his hand and was ready to fight because someone dared to block the Bahalu's path. One of his men asked him to look around carefully, indicating a great danger. The magician immediately recognized him and called him by his full name, as if he himself was surprised to see him. Zed saw him and thought to himself that this character was so familiar to him that he felt at one with him. This was the character he played the most and the one who was with him until the last moment. Now was certainly not the best time to meet him, but Jinho was still happy about it, even in the role of Zed the enemy. Torres stood in front of all his men and asked Zed if he really was the one they were looking for. But the Black Flame Mage interceded again and ordered all the knights to retreat, promising again that no one would touch them. Then Zed was convinced that the Black Flame was protecting him, but he did not understand why they needed to do this. Teros Bahal asked the magicians if they were the same secret organization of the Rahans that there were rumors about. He was indignant that the Black Flame, I don't even know who he was, still continued to defend the boy and thereby completely crossed any line. Torres raised his sword above his head and threatened that they would pay with their lives for attacking the Bahal. But the Black Flame of the Arikans could not allow such an attitude towards themselves and immediately used their power to stop the knights. They cast a magic circle on the entire squad so quickly that none of the knights even had time to understand when exactly it happened. This circle was a trap. Could be stepped on and avoided. The Black Flame of the Arikans were able to predict this situation and the place where to place this trap. Zed immediately realized that the man at the head of the mages was not even of the 5th or 6th circle. He was a mage of the 7th circle who warned the knights that when they raised their legs an explosion would occur. Torres continued to be indignant. He was angry that the Arikans apparently wanted the military to smash, but Mac replied that he simply wanted the knights to go away. But Torres did not want to obey the order of his enemy and clenched the hilt of his sword with both hands, preparing for battle. He also could not allow himself to be treated in this way and believed that no one could tell him what to do except his master. Zed got nervous. I understand that if the events took place in the first half of the game, then Torres was only in the 6th circle. In Zed's opinion, the upcoming battle was doomed. and if a fight broke out the night and the Torres would be destroyed. Teros Bahal used his lion's roar skill, which was the Bahal's first secret technique. Zed knew that this technique could only be used by the seventh circle, otherwise one could die. Very worried about him, Zed jumped up to the magician and demanded that the magic circle be removed from the knights. But only Grozny could look at him and answer that it was impossible because he was only following the order of his master. The magician explained that he was ordered to protect the young man, and there were no orders to follow his requests. To this Zed concluded that then they must protect him, they will kill the heir of the Bahals. Zed noted that this was an abuse of power and they could have easily accomplished their task and immortality, and again demanded that the magic circle be removed. Realizing that the magician would not listen to him in any way, he turned to the Torres himself and demanded that he stop. Then he just shut his mouth. I want to listen to no one. He was angry at the boy who killed General Clark and the innocent people of the South and believed that he should pay in full for it. Zed tried to explain that everything was wrong and offered to talk, and to his surprise received an approving response. But first Teros Bahal wanted to bring all his enemies to their knees and rushed into battle. Teros Bahal ran, which meant that he tore his legs away from the magic circle that was cast by the Arachans. Torres ran forward safely, not holding his sword over his head. Zed discovered that there was no explosion, and it turns out that the Arakanov magician listened to him and removed the magic circle. But the explosion happened later. Everything that was on the surface of the earth flew to the sides. The seventh circle mage did not move from his place and watched his enemies closely. Ryu struggled to her feet, only screaming at Zed. He managed to put up a protective barrier and the knight couldn't hurt him. Zed understood that if it weren't for the black flame, he would have definitely died from such a blow. Teros Bahal broke through 4 layers of the wind barrier of the seventh circle mage, and although he was still not fully pumped up, he was already so strong. Well, this attack did not pass without a trace for the knight. From the powerful blow, his internal organs were damaged, and he began to spit blood. These were the consequences of using the complex secret technique of the lion's roar. When the Teros Bahal cleared his throat a little, Zed approached him and asked if he felt better. He asked why the knight used the secret technique if he was still not ready for it. The knight agreed with him, although he did not understand how he found out about the secret, and immediately after these words he fell unconscious. The rest of the knights immediately rushed to his aid, not quite understanding what was happening to him. Zed explained that it was a reverse flow of mana, and the knight should have provided help immediately, otherwise he was in great danger. The other knights began to shake him and tried to help him with their powers. But it was all in vain, because if the healing circle was lower than the victim, then the reverse flow could not be corrected. There was only one person then who could heal Thors, and that was the seventh circle mob from the flame of the Arachans. Zed understood how stupid it would be to ask him about this, but there was no other option. The seventh circle mage was taken aback by such a request. In another situation he would most likely never have done this. The mage looked at Zed in confusion, asking if he was really asking him to heal the knight. Zed nodded in confirmation, noting that Torres was his old friend. The magician was indignant, stressed that the knights were enemies to him, and they could not be friends, and Zed suggested looking at this situation from the perspective of the magician's benefit. He noted that if Torres died, then the Rahan could not avoid a full-scale war with the Bahals, but the magician replied that the heir himself was to blame for this, and it had nothing to do with his work. Zed felt that there was no time left and said that the root cause was the magician and it was directly related to his work. Zed walked over and picked up Knight Torres' sword and looked back at the seventh circle mage. Zed noted that if Max did not heal Toros immediately, his work of protection would end. It was a kind of ultimatum, but the young men had no other choice. Zed emphasized that he always kept his promises and the magician should know about it. If he had been following him for so long, he should have been sure that there was no bluff. The magician explained that if his master found out about this, he would be furious. I still doubt whether it was worth it for him to help the knight. Zed responded to this that he could handle it. I asked again to heal the knight in spite of everything. When the magician approached Thors, the other knights blocked his path, noting that the magician did not dare lay his hands on the heir. But Zed ordered them to retreat, explaining that only this man could help Torres, otherwise the heir could die. Having heard about this, the knights thought about it and decided that they would still have to retreat to save the life of their master. The seventh circle mage moved closer to the Torres and, as promised, was able to correct the flow of mana and pull the knight out of the clutches of death. When Thors felt better, some of the knights cried with happiness that his life was saved. Zed was briefly distracted by the restoration of Torres, so I didn't notice how the poppy of the 7th circle disappeared as soon as I was able to help the knight. It all seemed very strange, but Zed could no longer change anything since he had already done too much. Soon after, Rue and Zed reached the outskirts of Tamaya village. It was already quite dark, which was just what they needed. Although they arrived at this place together with the knights one way or another, they no longer attracted the attention of outsiders. Zed twirled the 9th magic card in his hand, which meant abandonment or survival. Rue asked if those were the mages they met in the forest of Black Flame. I assume that they were the ones who left the previous map. Zed confirmed this, noting that now the Arakans said that they would leave him alone. Zed asked the girl how she knew about the Black Flame, and she replied that everyone knew about it, although a minority knew what they were actually doing. Looking at the knights, the girl noted that they should lie low and nodded in the direction where everything was under heavy guard, and they could be killed at the first opportunity. Zed responded to this by saying that if they were magicians and he was a knight, he would have been killed immediately, and explained that for a knight the most important thing was honor, and killing someone who saved their life went against their values even if the person was wanted. For the sake of honor, a knight is ready to give his life, but for the sake of profit, a poppy was ready to kill even a friend. Knights always had to put pressure on honor and provide magicians with some great benefit. After this dialogue, one of the knights approached them and informed them that their master was looking for them and asked them to follow him. To Zed and Rio's surprise, they were greeted with a cup of hot tea and everything looked quite welcoming. Torres said that they were given Minera tea, which was grown in their family, and it was incredibly aromatic. Zed, after listening to the story about the tea, immediately took a sip and then asked the knight about his well-being. The knight thanked Zed and noted that it was all thanks to him. Ryu listened to their short dialogue and still could not decide to take even a sip of this tea. Zed noted that he did not like the formal atmosphere and asked to switch to informal terms. Ryu nevertheless decided to take a few sips of aromatic tea. After trying the tea, Ryu immediately relaxed. Tasted simply wonderful. Zed continued to speak and noted that the knight was turning 17 and therefore it was possible to speak more relaxedly, but he looked at him with wide eyes. Torres asked how old Zed was, and he answered that he was 15 years old, and then asked if it was possible to call a knight an older brother, but he answered that for a magician it was too much. Ryu listened to their dialogue and thought that Arahan and Bahal were talking like friends, and this seemed very curious to her. Torres gently corrected their dialogue and stated that he would first like to thank Zed for the fact that thanks to him he remained alive. Zed was surprised that Toros actually said this to the magician, and after all, the heir to the Bahala's nose was supposed to be up to the sky tomorrow. He knew this character trait of Toros, which by the way he really liked. Torres' face frowned and he suggested getting down to business, and reminding him that Mock had spoken about the misunderstood situation with Clark's death, asked him to explain what that meant. Zed replied that this was exactly what it meant and promised that she would try to explain everything in detail. He explained his entire journey from prison to the present moment, of course excluding the words about how he developed mana and a thunderous aura. Zed then noted that everyone knew that the Arakans were not avoiding the approaching battle, and that they were the first to come to kill him, and he simply rose in response. To this, Torres said that if the guy was telling the truth, then it could be taken as self-defense. But Torres doubted whether this was true. Zed replied that if he did not want to explain everything, he would simply leave the knight to die, emphasizing that there could not be a more convincing argument, with which the knight agreed. After thinking for a bit, Torres said that he would believe Zed and accepted that he might have misunderstood the current situation. Torres offered Zed some freshly crushed minar as a gift to apologize for the misunderstanding and placed a small bag on the table. Zed responded to this by saying that if the knight was going to apologize, he should have fulfilled one of his requests, and Torres replied that if it was within his power, he would of course fulfill it. Zed assured that it was just within his power and asked to find the person that Ryu had lost. Torres was surprised. I don't understand what benefit Zed would get from this because it didn't look like a magician at all. Zed replied that it wasn't that important to him because he had promised to help the girl in her search. The next morning, Zed and Ryu woke up in the tent that was assigned to them for the night. Immediately after waking up, Zed began training, which happened every morning. Ryu watched him train and wondered how he could decide to just ask the Bahal to find a person for someone else. She thought he was really weird. Ryu asked Zed if he was hungry and suggested looking for some verdant beef. He promised that as soon as he finished one approach, they would go together and look. Torres was watching them from around the corner. He was very surprised by what the magician was doing and why they were spilling pod. He was also interested in what kind of magician it was who was used to laugh at sweat as something barbaric. He thought about how he once heard that Zed Arahan had no mana, and for a knight this was the same as him not being able to even hold a sword in his hands. But nevertheless Zed Arahan continued to work and did not give in. Torres believed that there was so much honor in him, and was not sure if he could have behaved there so proudly in his place. Torres decided that, with such a magician he was more like a knight than some of them, he would definitely become friends. He really liked this guy even though he seemed strange to him. But nevertheless he felt a strong interest and some kind of connection with him. Torres gave orders, and for lunch Zod and Ryu were brought Vertisan beef. They were very surprised that such a rarity was prepared for them. Torres laughed and jokingly emphasized that they were hosting the Rahan himself, and added that this beef was useful for gaining muscle mass because it contained a lot of protein. Torres invited everyone to sit down at the table so as not to waste time before eating. Torres was pleased that they were at a round table where everyone sat as equals and no one stood out. Zed smiled because everything was similar to Torres, which made him like him more and more. As they sat down to dinner, Ryu asked Zed if the beef was safe to eat and if it was poisoned. Zed smiled and asked not to worry, assuring that everything was fine with the meat and that the beef was even tastier than what they ate in prison. Rio relaxed and began to eat her lunch, taking a bite and expressing her admiration for such wonderful food out loud. Zed thought that in the world nothing was given for free, and thought that since the Torres feed them so well and expensively, it was more likely that he needed something. One of the knights rose from his chair and turned to Thors, noting that he felt uncomfortable and wanted to leave. Following him, other knights rose up and did not hesitate to express that they could not tolerate the Arachne in their outpost and wanted to leave the dinner. As a result, only Torres, Zed, and Ryu remained sitting at the table while the rest of the invited knights hurried away. As soon as the knights left, Torres apologized on behalf of them all for such rudeness. Zed assured that there was nothing wrong with it and asked not to punish them if Torres thought about it. Torres was surprised that the Erichan continued to defend the knights even after such humiliation, to which he replied that they had grown up with the idea that magicians were enemies, and that they should not be angry with them, and the best solution was to try to understand them. Torres lowered his head and said that he also needed to learn to understand someone. Zed decided to change the atmosphere and reminded them that Torres wanted to tell them something, to which Torres replied that the magician had already figured everything out himself. He asked if they could postpone their departure for another day and not go to Filda. He explained that he wanted to show everyone that they were not bad guys at all, and that a day would be enough for that. Zed thought for a long time and asked what Ryu thought about it. The girl agreed to note that the knights were supposed to be doing the searching, and she didn't want them to pretend that they were conducting it. Outside the walls of the village of Tamai on the southern front, they were clearing the area. Many monsters roamed these areas, and it was necessary to get rid of them in order to protect the entire population. This was the direct responsibility of the knights, and they were so accustomed to it that they no longer saw any great difficulty in their work. Having cut down one of the monsters, the knight turned to Torres, noting that it was a low-ranking monster, and Torres praised him. Having finished clearing the area, Torres announced that they should continue the search and set off immediately. Zed followed him. He did not understand with what thought the knight brought him along. Torres assembled a frontline search party of 20 people. Since the south and west had the highest concentration of monster search missions, here were the most difficult. Zed thought that the Torres had led him along because of the upcoming party. It was a tradition for the Ubahals to throw a celebratory party at the end of a search to celebrate the safe return of the soldiers. Apparently Thor's plan was to include Zed in this atmosphere of mutual support as befits a 17-year-old. One of the knights shouted to Torres that unidentified tracks had been found. Torres examined them, chuckled, and replied that he had seen something like that for the first time. He turned to the entire squad and asked if anyone knew whose tracks these were. One of the knights stepped forward and suggested that they looked like the tracks of a monster that had not yet been discovered, and reminded them that according to the regulations it was appropriate to return and report this to headquarters. Torres disagreed with this and noted that they were in the first zone. And even if it was an unknown type of monster, it would still be of low rank, and your knights convinced him to return back. Zed thought that the knights were right and it was worth retreating. The entity was completely unknown, and it was dangerous to fight with such, but he offered his help. Torres asked if the Erichan knew who the tracks belonged to, and he replied that they were the tracks of a basilisk. It was a mid-class monster, but given the size of the squad, there shouldn't have been any problems with it. Torres was surprised that Zed actually knew about this, but the other knights were outraged that the heir trusted the words of some mage who could not have known about the monster in the south when he was originally from the west. Zed smiled and asked if the knights had any proof that the basilisk was found only in the south and noted that the Rohin could have kept better records of the monsters. The knights replied that he could just be making fun of them. Zed immediately became serious and said that only the Bahals were laughing and ordinary warriors should not have spoken informally with the heir of the Arahants. Torres intervened in this meaningless dialogue and ordered everyone to stop this ignorance after asking the knights to stand quietly until he ordered otherwise. Torres turned to the back and apologized for the mistake of his people. He only wanted to do the best. Before they could finish their sentence, a huge snake-headed basilisk monster burst out from the forest at them. Torres gave the order to the entire squad to prepare for the upcoming battle, after which he gave the order for everyone to disperse and assume combat readiness. The knights listened to their master without question and clearly carried out all his orders and instructions and immediately took a very good position to begin the battle. As soon as the warriors were ready, he gave the command to attack and everyone rushed at the monster. Immediately the basilisk was hit with a multitude of powerful blows which at first did not cause much damage to it. This monster was very large and had, in addition to a large amount of strength, also good armor which protected it from blows. Torres, seeing that the blows were not getting through, was a little taken aback. Zed thought that the knights had nowhere else to train, but no attacks from the 5th and 6th circle could penetrate them. The Basilisk's tail was covered with huge spikes, and soon the monster began to attack itself. Zed knew what could happen next and shouted to the knights to lie down quickly. Torres emphasized the importance of the magician's words and ordered his people to listen to his instructions as well. The knights immediately fell to the ground because they could not obey the orders of their master. Zed also fell to the ground but continued to watch everything that was happening around him. One of the knights was more indignant than the others and did not lie down on the ground, saying that he had no reason to listen to what some magician was saying. Zed, ignoring this ignorance, shouted at him and called him names and ordered him to lie down. The monster's tail could knock this stupid knight down at any moment and take his life, and it was strange that he didn't understand this. The basilisk dropped a huge number of spikes on its enemies. It felt like an entire army of archers was attacking. Those knights who managed to lie down and press themselves to the ground could not be harmed as the monster's spikes flew much higher. But those who remained standing on their feet would be pierced by the poisonous thorns of this monster and could also be nailed to the nearest tree. Torres was surprised that indeed none of the spikes fell to the ground as Zed had said. Zed meanwhile knocked the indignant knight to the ground, and when the spikes flew by he explained to him with a smile that the spikes were very painful and his life was saved. Zed turned to Torres and explained to him that the monster would also direct the attack to the ground and it would not be difficult to avoid. Torres concluded from this that the monster would have to be killed before that. Zed asked if he could trust Torres and the knights with the one on the left, and Torres was very surprised that the magician was going to fight one of the monsters alone and that he knew the weak points. Zed replied that there was no time and that Torres should say whether they could fulfill such a request. Torres promised that they would quickly deal with that monster and warned that Zed had no right to die. Zed smiled, thinking that it wasn't Torres who should be worried in this situation, and noted that he was a really cool guy. Torres led his squad, explaining that they were taking on the monster that was on the left. Zed thought that since his favorite character was fighting hard, he couldn't just stand aside. All of Zed's stats increased by 10 points and Transcendence magic was applied. Torres began to attract the attention of the monster that was given to him, and the monster immediately changed its target to him. Torres shouted that he was his opponent and ran forward, dodging the attack. Soon this monster was subjected to the powers of Torres. The heir raised his sword above his head and ordered his men to focus all their forces on the monster on the right. Torres himself tried to be useful everywhere at once and carefully observed the battlefield. But when he looked around carefully, he became slightly upset and clicked his teeth in irritation. In fact, there were still 2 monsters left, which wasn't very good. Zed used all his strength and rushed at the snake-like monster. Zed smiled, thinking about the basilisk being on its first hunt. The monster was not lucky enough to meet such opponents, thus shortening many years of his life. Zed was very fast, striking the snake blow after blow, knowing his weak, vulnerable spots. This only made Basilisk even more angry, and he began to attack Zed more actively. Zed was focused on just one thing, the Basilisk's weakest spot. He knew that if you hit the monster where the top of a human's head was, the basilisk would die very quickly. It was at this place that the Erichan aimed and, choosing the right moment, attacked him. The attack was very successful, and Zed smiled contentedly as he looked at the monster dying in agony. Despite being seriously wounded, the monster still tried to reach out and grab Zed, moving its jaws. Zed decided that it was worth fixing this monster of such suffering and dealt another blow. After the basilisk died, a clot of glowing energy came out of its mouth. This was called demonic breath, which was the main ingredient for elixirs. If you pour holy water on it, there was a chance that it would become an elixir. The elixir was an item that improved a random stat, but Zed only had to improve magic. So magic potions came out of the demonic breath. Having dealt with this monster, Zed immediately decided to go for the second one, and then he could get 2 very good magic potions and pump up his skills well. Meanwhile, Teros was fighting the second monster. But it was harder for him to deal with it because he didn't know its weak points. Moreover, he was not alone but with other knights who also helped him slay the monster. Too focused on killing the monster, Teros found himself separated from his party. I tried to resist the monster. He discovered this and got a little worried because his strength was already leaving him. But he didn't give up. I think he shouldn't have hesitated, but suddenly he made a small mistake and the beast leveled out right above him and was about to swallow him. Teros no longer had time to jump aside or somehow return from the dark, toothy mouth of the basilisk. And just as suddenly, the monster became engulfed in a multitude of lightning bolts which were transferred not to the weapon of the heir of the Bahals. He didn't understand what was happening until he looked up and saw Zed, who was already riding the snake. When he saw it, he was, to put it mildly, surprised that he could have already defeated his monster and was trying to defeat the next one. Teros was amazed at where his new friend got such enormous power from and simply froze in place, watching as Zed killed the snake. By that time, the rest of the knights had reached their master and also saw the form in which the hated magician was, and what captured their attention most was the glow that emanated from him. They knew that it was a thunderous aura, and everyone was speechless because of it. I don't know how one can comment on this. Teros directly asked Zed if his energy was really a thunder aura. I don't understand how that was possible because I heard that the mage had no mana at all. Zed easily answered that he had acquired it only recently, which shocked Teros even more as he did not understand how one could acquire mana. The ring of mana that wrapped around the heart appeared at birth. There were cases when all the streams connected a little longer, but this happened before the age of 6. Everything looked like so. Zed, who was already 15 initially, did not have a ring of mana. This was due to the fact that a person born with 9 fingers would suddenly grow a 10th, and this had never happened in the 1,000-year history of the Empire. Even the heavens bowed to Zed's will, and Teros was convinced of this perfectly. Having killed the monster and waited until the demonic breath came out of it, Zed asked Teros if he could take it for himself, and he happily gave the artifact to the magician who caught the monster. Jinho thought that he had been playing for more than 10 years, and during that time he had never collected 2 demonic breaths at once, and was very happy with such luck. Soon the rumor that Arahan, who went with everyone to the first line, defeated a monster that had not been previously detected, spread throughout the area. Other rumors were added to these. The knights discussed that Arahan was generous because he gave the skin of a defeated monster, and in general was different from other magicians, at least because he was always training hard instead of resting. Many regretted that they did not go on reconnaissance that day because they really wanted to see everything with their own eyes. The knight who distrusted Mogu the most soon came up to him personally and thanked him for saving lives. Zed, as if it was some small thing, asked if anyone was hurt. The knight assured that everything was fine and promised that the knights would learn this lesson and work on themselves. Ryu asked smilingly what he had done that the knight's opinion of him had changed so abruptly, and Zed replied that apparently the knights simply liked him, and that tomorrow they would be able to help in the search. Their conversation was interrupted by Teros, who called Zed and asked him to come out with him for a while to talk. Teros personally praised him for his good work and noted that the other guys' opinions about him had also changed a lot, and now everyone who was in intelligence wanted to help them in Field. Zed noted with a smile that all the knights must be tired and asked to convey their gratitude, to which Teros emphasized that Max had saved their lives, and it was natural for the knights to repay the debt for such a thing. Teros noted that he would visit his family the next day and suggested that the leader must have been very surprised to hear about such events. After that, the Zed asked if they were angry at him for getting close to the Arafan. The heir of the family explained that most likely he was misunderstood, and turning to Ryu promised her that every effort would be made, and the one she was looking for would definitely be found. Zed grinned and turning to the girl noted how great it was that the heir of the Bahals himself was helping her, and that it gave her a lot of hope. Ryu could barely hold back her tears, because she was very worried that their search might be unsuccessful, and she was very grateful to both guys. The next day they reached a port trading city in the south called Filda. Ryu said that the person she was looking for was called a fox. She was a girl of about 13 years old. Her special feature was her long golden hair. Ryu showed how tall she was and noted that her face was very cute. That's all she could say about her. Zed turned to the knights and noted that they did not know where the girl had gone, but she was definitely in the Frida, and it was worth looking for her among the slaves of the middle and small families in the city, which the knights were definitely capable of. Zed then turned to Ryu and suggested that she go first to where they worked together and asked if there were any clothing stores anywhere in the city. Ryu took him to this shop and he immediately recognized the same drunken trading firm where he worked and where he was accused of theft and thrown out. They got dressed, and when they reached the place where he worked, Zed said that he would go there alone because Ryu could easily find out what could interfere with their search. Leaving Ryu in the alley, Zed went to the owner of the place from which he was unfairly kicked out. A man met him and bowed his head low, greeting him, and then asked what product Zed was interested in. Zed, first of all, I'll clarify whether this company sold hops. I have some doubts that I've come to the right place. The man laughed, noting that the gentleman had most likely made a mistake and had come to a slave trading company. He was surprised because the man was telling him about some product and the man suspected something was wrong with his guest. He straightened up and immediately changed his tone and rudely answered Zed that he was definitely not from the nobility and had brazenly decided to put on a circus. Zed made an offended face, replied that the gentleman was mistaken, and asked what he would do if his guest actually turned out to be a nobleman. The merchant laughed at the fact that the boy was trying to fool an experienced merchant, noting that people like him survived only on their keen intuition, which told him that the guest had a false status. Zed was already angry and emphasized that the merchant's intuition had seriously let him down. But the merchant did not calm down and behaved very rudely. He raised his hand. I wish to hit the boy on the head, warned that he was beginning to irritate him. But soon the merchant very much regretted his crooked words and sat covered in bruises with a very guilty face. Zed warned him that if he didn't want to get beat up again, he had to answer directly, and when he didn't hear a clear answer, he hit him in the face. After that, Zed explained that he knew the building as a small firm and asked why the merchant was in this place. The merchant said that the previous owner failed and they took his place. After this, Zed asked who Devito was, assuming that he was a fellow slave trader, and the trader confirmed this, indicating that Devito was the largest slave owner of all in the south. Having decided that he would go to him right after that, Zed asked the merchant where all his people were. The merchant did not fully understand what he was talking about and asked if the gentleman meant their goods. For this, the merchant received another blow to the face, and the subject was ordered to speak everything frankly. The merchant shouted something about food and was hit in the face again without explanation. The merchant continued to talk about products, and each time she got hit in the face even harder than before, saying that slaves were the same people and they could not be compared to things. But the slave traders were not used to this attitude towards their goods, and he considered them only as parts of his business. Zed was very angry and asked the merchant to live with at least a drop of dignity, which was simple, and then ordered him to show everything. The merchant no longer argued with Zed and took him to where he hid all his slaves. He pulled back the curtain behind which were the cages. In these cages sat all the people he sold to the rich. Zed looked at the prisoners in this cage with heaviness in his eyes and imagined how it must have been for them to live their fate in this way. The sight of people in such a place filled him with rage. He had to hold out to the last. Zed asked the merchant if he had any more prisoners, and then assured him that these were all he had. Zed managed to see that there were no blondes or children in the cage, and young slaves were very expensive, and there was a high probability that the fox had either already been sold or was in some larger place. Before heading to a larger slave owner, Zed turned to the merchant and said that he would give him one last chance to get back on track. Zed demanded that he bring all the money he had and also the key to the prison. When all the people were freed, Zed imprisoned the merchant in his own cage. He advised me to sit in it for a while and slammed the doors, locking them with a key. He recommended the merchant to experience all this horror for himself and then walked away together with all the freed people. People were incredibly grateful to Zed. They blessed him and wished him all possible earthly blessings. He divided all the company's money between the freed slaves and took them to the lodgings the knights had told him about. Each prisoner tried to personally thank the master, although Zed was very embarrassed. Zed listened to their lives while eating and also learned a lot of unexpected things while talking to experienced people. One of the men introduced himself as Gordon. He said that he used to act as an assistant to the Cherville family. When the family broke up, he ended up with a prisoner at the dealers. Zed was surprised that the man was actually in this family because he thought that everyone from there had died, and the old man called his life pure luck. If the mages had Arrakans, then the blacksmiths had Chervilles. In the best years, people lined up in droves for their artifacts. However, they were exterminated by the Empire for treason to the last man. Recently, this name was erased from history and they were no longer spoken of. Kim Jinho also knew about this part of lore from the game's plot. They did not have a single heir left who could take over their business. For the empire that was at war with monsters, this was a great loss, and the golden days were in the past, as this old man said. Zed said that it was a shame because if Chervilov's business had continued, great artifacts could have appeared. And for him it was also a huge loss. The old man wanted to tell her something and asked her to keep it a secret. Zed became very curious, and he promised that it would remain only between them. The old man timidly looked around so that no one could overhear him and asked the magician if they could move to another place for a short while. Zed understood him and easily agreed to a short walk away from prying ears. The old man said that the Eva had a real heir named Lacto. Zed believed his ears and asked where this man was. The old man said that his main assistant died for him and they exchanged clothes, and then he, so as not to be recognized, burned his face. The old man noted that if everything went according to their plan, then this man was now living under the name Myers. Zed could not believe that his ears heard such valuable information. But even if this man survived, he would forever remain a criminal. On the run, and meeting the heir of this family was extremely difficult. Zed thanked the man for the story and noted that he would like to meet him again one day. The old man shared the magician's emotions, noting that it was the first time he had met someone he could trust with such information. After this conversation, Zed suggested that the old man go back, noting that if they were gone for a long time, they might become interested. Rio spent a long time picking at her plate during dinner and ate almost nothing. She looked very sad and depressed and sighed heavily all the time. Zed watched her and asked why she didn't eat, thinking that she simply didn't like the food. He asked her not to be sad, assuring her that the slave trader was just a small fish and that they would soon find a Devito from whom they would be able to shake something out. The old man, hearing the name Devito, immediately perked up and asked again if he had misheard it. Having made sure that he had heard everything correctly, the old man emphasized with horror that it was impossible to go to this man under any circumstances because his level was much higher than where they were, and also a very influential person was standing with him. Zed smiled and replied that whoever it was, he had the entire garrison of Bahals, and there was no need to worry about it, but the old man sighed heavily and said that Devito's hands reached all corners of the empire. It was said that his biggest clients were the Arrakans. As soon as the old man said this, Zed strained hard, trying to piece together all the information. A lot of questions immediately popped into his head. He couldn't even imagine that the mages he had recently met in the forest could somehow be related to the slave trade. Zed tried to refute this, wondering out loud why the Arahan from the west would deal with the far south, to which he pointed out the great benefit. He explained that for them the loss of the enemy was a victory, and the purchase of southern slaves harmed all the noble families of the south, including the Bahals. Now the old man's story sounded quite similar to the Arrakans, and Zed thought about it seriously. He became very curious about whether the Black Flame was defended by Devito. And if that was the case, then it wasn't just slaves that were at stake. Perhaps this could be the beginning of a quiet war between the Arrakans and the Bahals, at least that's what Zed thought. Ryu looked at him and asked what would happen if everything suddenly turned out to be true. Zed understood that the girl was worried that he would get into trouble because of her, but he didn't even know how to calm her down. He asked her not to worry and noted that of course he was doing everything for her, but it was also a matter of honor. He explained that he followed his own convictions, everything else was secondary and complementary. He understood that in any case he was obliged to resolve the issue with the slaves because it could not leave him indifferent. The next day Zed and Ryu went to the port. Not far away there was a slave market of that same Devito. It was a huge practical castle, and one could guess what money it was built with. Zed went up to the entrance and was met by one of the slave owner's men. Inside, the workers immediately heard some noise and turned their attention to it, distracted from their work. Zed entered the inner chambers in a businesslike manner, paying attention to the security that was trying to stop him. Having entered inside and stopped, the magician asked where Devito was. The workers were very unhappy about this and began to demand that he introduce himself and explain why he didn't know where he was going, and they also noted that he looked like a young aristocrat, although even such people could get a punch in the head in this place. Zed responded to all this by saying that their manners had completely deteriorated because they were doing business with the Arikans, and he covered his face, showing that they should be ashamed. Well, when he raised his eyes again, everyone saw his red eyes and immediately understood who had come to visit them. They immediately began to apologize to him and fall on their knees for not recognizing him. Zed's gaze fell on one of the people who was in the back of the room and also fell on his knees in front of him. The magician assumed that this was the very person he was looking for. Although judging by his clothes, he looked more like a subordinate, the way he reacted could lead one to think that he was from the Black Flame. In fact, Devito was on one of the balconies and watched everything from above. When he saw his guest, he cursed, not very happy about what was happening. He turned to the magician and asked why the high-ranking gentleman was in such a dirty place. Devito came down and said that he had heard rumors about the hobo firm being cleaned up. Zed realized that the man hadn't fallen for it. The Arichan had come to him. Devito took the glass and poured himself a drink, noting that the young man had melted to the end, was braver than he expected, or did not know anything about the world at all. Zed responded to this that from that day on the Arahans stopped working with him. He came to take all the remaining slaves, and the man should have cooperated, not argued. Hearing this, Devito spat out everything he had put in his mouth, clearly outraged. Well, looking at the magician, he laughed and immediately waved his hand, changed for this laugh. Zed pointed out that Devito had no manners at all and wanted to stay alive after he dared to look the Arichan in the eye, but the slave owner only laughed at this. Tapping his finger on the glass, Devito asked him to stop wagging his tongue and stated that he would not have killed anyone anyway. He took out a dagger and asked to take this as a life lesson, smiling slyly right into Arahan's eyes. Zed quickly realized that he had no choice but to fight back all the information and the imprisoned people. He also realized that there was only one person from the Black Flame. The only thing that interested him was what circle he was. If this person was of the 5th circle, then it would be possible to try to fight him, and Zed decided that if she were to attack first, then she would first deal with him. Suddenly a voice was heard from a man who was not in the hall. The man ordered to surround the building, and Zed thought this voice was very familiar. The man screamed again and ordered the 1st and 2nd squads to go inside and kill everyone who was inside. Teros appeared on the threshold, who also arrived in time, and now the Arichan was not alone and could count on support. Everyone froze in their places, amazed that such a place was found not only by the Arahan.